Imagine having the strength to stay calm in chaos, to stay kind when others are cruel, to lead with wisdom, even when no one claps for you. Imagine living with such clarity that no setback, no betrayal, no storm can shake you. Sounds impossible, right? But one man lived that way. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He was Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world. And still, every night, he sat down and wrote reminders to himself about how to be a better person. He didn't write to impress anyone. He wrote to survive, to stay focused, to stay human. And what he left behind, Meditations, has become one of the most powerful guides ever written on how to live with purpose, peace, and strength, no matter what life throws at you. But here's the problem. Most people never read it, or they read it once, think it's just old wisdom, and miss the real power behind it. Today, that changes, because you're about to discover the entire philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, explained in simple, clear, practical language. Not for historians, not for scholars, but for you, for your daily life, for your struggles, for your mind. These aren't dusty ideas from 2,000 years ago. They are tools, and once you learn to use them, you'll walk through life calmer, clearer, and stronger than 99% of people you know. So, before we begin, do one thing for yourself. Type in the comments, "I am the master of my mind." Write it, own it, repeat it, because that's what Marcus believed, that your life is shaped not by what happens to you, but by how you choose to respond. Now get ready. This is not just philosophy. This is a manual for greatness. Let's begin. Let's begin with a question that Marcus Aurelius asked himself again and again in different ways. Why do I let small things upset me when I am only a breath in the vastness of time? It wasn't a poetic thought. It wasn't for drama. It was survival, a mental survival skill. Because when you're Emperor of Rome, when everyone is either praising you or betraying you, ego is always hunting you. Every victory whispers, "You're special." Every insult screams, "You're not enough." And if you don't train your mind, you start believing both. So Marcus trained his mind every day to zoom out, not just from the problems of the empire, but from the empire itself. He reminded himself that Rome was a tiny dot in time, that his palace would one day be dust, that his name would be forgotten, that his body would rot, not to be dark, but to be free. Because when you realize that nothing lasts forever, you stop acting like everything is urgent. When you see your life next to the life of stars, you stop letting your ego take control. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop obsessing over how people see you. You stop clinging so tightly to things that were never yours to keep. This is what we call the cosmic perspective. And for Marcus, it wasn't just a nice idea. It was a tool, a powerful way to stay calm, kind, grounded, and focused, even when the whole world was losing its mind. So now, let's go deep into how this tool works, and how you can use it today, even if you're not wearing a Roman crown. Every time Marcus was faced with stress, vanity, jealousy, or fear, he zoomed out. He would mentally step away from the situation, lift himself above the city, above the empire, above the earth itself, and look down on it all. He would remind himself, this is small, not as a way of denying its importance, but to get perspective, real perspective. He wrote to himself, "How small a part of the boundless and unfathomable time is assigned to every man." Think about that for a second. How long do we live? 70, 80 years. Maybe 90 if we're lucky. Now compare that to the millions of years before you were born and the millions after you die. Your whole life becomes a flash, not even a blink. So why get offended? Why carry grudges? Why feel the need to always be right? Marcus wasn't saying your problems don't matter. He was saying they matter only for a short time. And once you realize that, your ego loses its grip. You stop trying to control things you were never meant to control. But Marcus didn't stop at time. He expanded space too. He would write about the Earth as just a point in space, floating among stars, which themselves are born and die. He knew this long before science could confirm it, that galaxies existed beyond what the eye could see, that everything, from the tallest mountain to the greatest king, is made of the same stuff, dust, atoms, nothing permanent. From this view, he asked himself, what is wealth? What is power? What is status? All of it, illusions that disappear in the dark. When you zoom out, fame means nothing. No one in another galaxy knows your name. Not even the richest man on earth owns anything for long. Not even an emperor escapes time. That's why Marcus kept reminding himself, you are a soul carrying a corpse. Not to insult himself, but to wake himself up, to stay clear, to stop taking life so personally. Because ego loves to make you forget. It tells you that you're special, that your pain is unique, that your life is the center of the universe. And when you believe that, everything starts to hurt more. You react, you compare, you panic. But when you step back, when you see the full picture, your ego has no room to grow. It's not that you become cold, you actually become warmer, because you understand more. You stop judging others so quickly, because you realize they're just passing through this life too. You start listening more. You soften, you become humble, not in a fake way, but deeply, because you know what truly matters. Marcus would reflect on how even the stars don't notice our drama. The earth spins whether you win the argument or not. The universe expands even while your heart breaks. This isn't depressing, it's liberating, because it teaches you can feel pain without becoming the pain. You can go through hard things without letting them define you. So what does this mean for your daily life? It means that next time someone insults you, you pause, you take a breath, and in that breath, you step back. You tell yourself, this person, like me, is temporary. This moment is just a ripple in a giant ocean. And suddenly, your anger melts. It means that when you're stuck in traffic, or your plan falls apart, or your post gets no likes, you don't spiral, you zoom out. You remind yourself, this is not forever. This is not who I am. This is just passing through me. It means that when you fail, at work, in love, in life, you don't fall apart, because you realize everyone fails. Every empire falls. What matters is how I respond. Marcus used this cosmic perspective not to escape his duties, but to do them better. He didn't say, nothing matters, so why try? He said, nothing lasts, so give your best now. And that's the real lesson. When you realize you don't have forever, you stop wasting time on what doesn't matter. The cosmic view kills procrastination. It kills envy. It kills perfectionism. Why? Because you realize you're not building a perfect life. You're building a meaningful one. You don't need to impress the stars. You just need to live in alignment with your soul. Marcus reminded himself constantly, what is the nature of this moment? What is in my control? What is my role in this vast play of life? These weren't abstract thoughts. They were reflections designed to clear the fog, to help him act, not react, to stay centered, not scattered. One of the most powerful things he ever wrote was this: "Soon you will have forgotten all things. Soon all things will have forgotten you." This may sound harsh, but it's pure freedom. Because if one day you and I will be forgotten, then let's stop worrying so much about what people think. Let's stop trying to be remembered for the wrong reasons. Let's stop chasing validation and start living with intention. When you understand this, your life becomes lighter, not less serious, but less heavy. You stop dragging around your disappointments like chains. You stop clinging to labels. You let go. You forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You realize life isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up fully for as long as you're here. Now, let's be clear. Cosmic perspective doesn't mean giving up on goals. It doesn't mean avoiding pain. It means seeing pain in context. It means seeing goals in balance. It means choosing what to care about and what to let float away like leaves in the wind. Most people live like they're going to live forever. They stress about promotions, gossip, likes, opinions. They chase things they can't keep and cry over things that don't matter in the long run. But those who think like Marcus, they move differently. They speak with less urgency. They love with more presence. They act with more care, because they're awake to the shortness and beauty of life. Marcus knew that every second we spend caught in ego is a second we lose connection to what's real. That's why he practiced zooming out, not once, not twice, but constantly. He would remind himself, "You have been made by nature for one thing: to live with virtue, to act justly, to speak truth, to fulfill your role with dignity." And when you remember that, when you feel it in your bones, something shifts. You stop chasing the spotlight. You stop needing to win at all costs. You stop being shaken by every little wave, because you know the ocean is bigger than all of it. You don't have to be emperor to use this perspective. You don't need a palace or a scroll. All you need is a pause, a breath, and the willingness to step back. To see yourself not as the main character of the world, but as a tiny part of a vast, unfolding story. And from that place, you find peace. Real peace. Not because life is easy, but because you are no longer owned by your ego. Marcus Aurelius lived with this mindset. He sat in marble halls, heard the cheers of crowds, dealt with traitors and sickness and war. But in his heart, he kept coming back to the stars, to the silence above the noise, to the truth that nothing lasts, and therefore every moment counts. And that's what this first lesson is about. It's not just philosophy, it's a tool, a way to remember what matters and release what doesn't. Use it, practice it, carry it with you. Because when your ego is screaming, when your pride is hurt, when life feels unfair, that's the moment to step back, to look from above, and to ask, what does this mean from the eyes of the cosmos? And suddenly, you'll breathe easier, because you'll know you are not the storm. You are the sky it moves through. When you realize you're not the storm, but the sky it moves through, something inside you loosens, the grip weakens, the tension softens. But then comes the next thought. If everything passes, does anything truly matter? That's the part that scares people. We want to hold on to youth, to people, to places, to certainty. But Marcus Aurelius saw it differently. To him, the passing nature of everything wasn't a reason for sadness. It was a reason to live fully. He didn't mourn impermanence. He found freedom in it. because the more you try to hold on to what cannot be held, the more you suffer. But the moment you accept that life is flowing, like a river you cannot freeze, you stop fighting it. You learn to move with it, to trust it, to embrace change without fear. Marcus saw transience as nature's most honest teacher. Look at how he spoke about it. The blooming flower, the falling leaf, the shifting clouds, the fading voices of praise, the silence that follows fame. He wrote that all things are born to die, that every beginning already carries an ending inside it. This wasn't poetic sadness, it was clarity, a clear eye looking at the truth and saying, yes, and still, I live with strength. He reminded himself over and over that emperors die, kings vanish, cities collapse, languages disappear, and still, life continues. This wasn't nihilism, this was freedom. Because when you stop expecting permanence, you stop being shocked when things change. You stop being crushed by loss. You start living lighter, sharper, more awake. In his writings, Marcus talked about the briefness of human life, not just in years, but in moments. That breath you just took, it's gone. That word you just heard, it's already echo. That thought you clung to, it's dissolved. And the only thing more dangerous than not noticing this is trying to resist it. What made him extraordinary wasn't that he understood this truth, but that he used it to stay steady. He didn't let impermanence depress him. He let it sharpen him. He used it as a reminder, don't waste time, don't cling, don't chase what won't last. This is why disappointment loses power when you accept impermanence. Because disappointment usually comes from the illusion that something would stay. A relationship, a job, a feeling, a plan. When it changes or ends, you feel betrayed. But if you walk into life already knowing that everything is passing, then you meet change not with bitterness, but with readiness. Marcus saw every ending as part of a natural rhythm. Think of the seasons. Spring doesn't fight summer. Summer doesn't fear fall. Fall doesn't mourn winter. Each one gives way to the next, and each one has its place. Human lives are no different. Jobs come and go. Relationships begin and end. Passions rise and fade. This isn't failure, it's movement, and movement is life. That's why Marcus didn't glorify legacy. He reminded himself often that even the most famous names would be forgotten. He mentioned Alexander the Great and Caesar, two men whose names shook the world, and pointed out that barely anyone remembered their servants, their friends, even their personalities. If greatness can fade so quickly, then why let your peace depend on recognition? Because when you no longer need something to last forever, you start to appreciate it more while it's here. That's the paradox. Letting go doesn't mean caring less. It means caring better, deeper, with full attention, because you know it won't be yours to keep. Marcus would often reflect on death, not in a morbid way, but as a compass. He would ask himself, if I knew I might die tomorrow, would this still matter? Would I waste this hour on anger, on gossip, on fear of the future? And most times the answer was no. That's how he filtered what deserved his time. Death wasn't his enemy. It was his guide. This is the secret of those who live with true presence. They've made peace with endings. They don't avoid the truth that everything changes. They work with it. They let it focus their attention. They let it cut through distraction. They let it burn away all that is fake. Marcus even wrote about this when talking about people. He reminded himself not to expect others to act a certain way, not because people are bad, but because they are also temporary. Moods change, opinions shift, bodies age, love evolves. People walk in and out of our lives, sometimes gently, sometimes suddenly. And that's not always a reason to grieve. Sometimes it's a reason to thank, because they came, because they shaped us, because they showed us something. You don't own anything in this life, not your house, not your job, not your reputation, not even your body. All of it is on loan from nature, and when you understand that, you stop gripping so tightly. You start taking care of things more gently, because you know they're passing through your hands, not into your possession. One of Marcus's strengths was his refusal to treat impermanence as an enemy. He didn't try to escape it with fantasy. He didn't distract himself with pleasures. He faced it. He looked straight at it and said, "This is what life is." And in that honesty, he found his peace. That peace is not the absence of emotion. It's not detachment in the cold sense. It's warmth. It's being able to feel joy, sorrow, beauty, love fully, without needing to trap them in a cage. It's like watching a sunset and knowing you can't freeze it. So instead of reaching for your camera, you put the phone down and just feel it before it slips away. In many ways, our pain comes from forgetting this. We think we can lock life in place, that if we just get the right partner, the right job, the right routine, it will all stay. But nothing stays. Not because you failed, but because that's how nature works. Marcus knew that nature gives, then takes. Breath in, breath out. Cling to nothing. Hold everything with open hands. Even his role as emperor he saw as temporary. He never wrote like a man obsessed with power. He wrote like a man preparing to leave it behind at any moment. That's how he stayed humble. He wasn't immune to the pull of ambition, but he reminded himself daily, this title, this throne, this power, it's not mine. I'm just borrowing it until nature takes it back. When he lost people he loved, he grieved, but he didn't crumble. He saw the pain clearly, but he didn't let it destroy him, because he knew everyone who lives must die. Everything that begins must end. And knowing this doesn't kill the love, it deepens it, because you don't take it for granted. This is one of the hardest things for most people to accept. We want to hold on, we want to make people stay, we want to freeze the moment. But Marcus shows us, you don't need forever to find meaning. You just need to be present while it lasts. That's enough. He also warned against resisting the flow of time. Resisting change is like standing in the middle of a river and trying to push the water back upstream. It doesn't work. It just exhausts you. Instead, learn to float with it, not aimlessly, but with trust. Trust that even when something ends, something else is beginning. That even after loss, there's still life. And even after a goodbye, there's still growth. Marcus would often speak of nature as a cycle. Life, death, decay, rebirth. Not in a mystical sense, but in a biological one. The leaf falls, turns to soil, feeds the roots, gives rise to new growth. Our lives follow the same rhythm, and when you accept that, you become part of something larger than yourself. You stop needing control and start participating in the dance. There's something powerful about people who've made peace with change. They walk with less fear, they love with less expectation, they face challenges with more calm, because they've learned, even this will pass, and when it does, I'll still be here, grounded, grateful, ready. This is the core of Marcus's strength. He didn't seek to avoid the pain of loss. He trained himself to carry it, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. He didn't need everything to last. He only needed to meet it with virtue while it was here. You can feel that mindset in every line he wrote. The acceptance, the clarity, the refusal to demand anything from the world except the chance to respond well. And when you live like that, disappointment loses its edge, not because life stops hurting, but because you stop expecting it to always feel good. There's freedom in that, a deep, steady kind of freedom, the kind that lets you hold joy in one hand and sorrow in the other without dropping either, the kind that lets you move forward after failure without shame, the kind that lets you say goodbye to what's gone while still being grateful it came. That's what impermanence gives you, not despair, but perspective, not fear, but fire. The fire to live more intentionally, to love more openly, to speak more honestly, to move more gently. Because now you know, this won't last. So let me give my best while it's here. Marcus didn't write for fame. He didn't write to be remembered. He wrote to remember, to remind himself of what matters, of what's real, of what will be gone tomorrow, even if it feels permanent today. And now you can carry that reminder too, in your relationships, in your work, in your moments of quiet. Let it whisper to you in hard times, "This will pass." Let it echo in moments of joy. Savor this now. Let it shape your choices, your values, your life. Because when you stop trying to make everything last, you start making everything count. That's not loss. That's liberation. When you stop needing things to last, you begin to act for the right reasons. No longer driven by fear or reward, but by principle. And that's where real character is born, not in what you achieve, but in how you carry yourself when no one is watching. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. His role wasn't just to understand the nature of life, but to lead within it, to act rightly, not because someone was watching, not because applause followed, but simply because it was the right thing to do. In fact, he led most powerfully when no one noticed, when decisions were thankless, when outcomes were unclear, when the weight of the empire was heavy and the praise was silent. To lead without recognition, to work without credit, to serve without being seen. That was the kind of leadership Marcus practiced, and that's the kind of strength most people overlook. It's quiet, it's invisible, but it is deeply noble and more needed than ever in our world. Today, we've grown used to attention. We want proof that our efforts matter. Likes, compliments, raises, reposts, validation that someone saw what we did and approved of it. But Marcus reminds us, the most important work you do will not be seen by others. It will be seen by your conscience, and that must be enough. He wrote about it constantly, that your job in life is to live according to reason and virtue. That's it. Not for applause, not to be remembered, not for rewards in the afterlife, just because it's right. He even reminded himself, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That sentence carries a quiet, direct force, because it strips away the noise. Don't talk about values, don't post quotes about integrity, just do it. Lead, even when it's boring, even when it's unseen, even when it costs you. That's what Marcus faced. He dealt with plagues, wars, famines, political games, people who lied to his face and bowed while betraying him behind closed doors, and yet he still got up every day and did his job, not for a statue, not for fame, but because it was his duty. That word, duty, meant everything to him. It wasn't a burden, it was a compass. He saw himself as a servant of the common good, He believed that nature had given him a role, and his only task was to fulfill it honorably. No shortcuts, no excuses. Even when others were lazy or corrupt, he held himself to a higher standard. Not because someone was grading him, but because he was watching himself. That's the mark of real leadership, when you don't cut corners just because no one will notice, when you don't lower your effort just because you're tired, when you still bring your full self to the task, even when the room is empty. That's the test of your character, not when things are easy, but when they're thankless. Marcus also warned against needing validation to do the right thing. He knew that applause can be dangerous, that it feeds the ego and makes you dependent on others' approval. He reminded himself that praise is just noise, that fame is fleeting, that the only true reward is a clean conscience. You see it again and again in meditations. Marcus asking himself, was my action in line with nature? Was it honest? Was it useful? And if it was, that was enough. Whether others noticed or not didn't change the value of the action. This mindset is hard today. We live in a world wired for performance. If no one sees it, it feels like it didn't happen. But the Stoic way says, the value of what you do is not in the audience, it's in the integrity. It's not in how loudly you do it, it's in how truthfully you do it. This shows up in small ways, like being kind to a difficult co-worker even when no one's around, showing up early to your shift even when the manager won't notice, being honest on your taxes when you could lie, speaking gently to your partner when you're frustrated, holding the door for a stranger who might not say thank you. These aren't grand acts, but they shape who you are. They build inner strength. They make you dependable, not just in public, but in private. And Marcus would say, if you can lead yourself like that, you can lead anyone. He also wrote about the temptation to complain, especially when no one appreciates you, when others do half the work but take twice the credit, when the people you help don't even say thank you. He felt those moments too, but he reminded himself, you are not here for rewards. You are here to do your work well. Let others chase applause. You stay grounded. That doesn't mean becoming cold. Marcus never said to shut down your heart. In fact, he wrote about compassion often. But he said to give love freely, without strings. To give help not for thanks, but because it's right. To be useful, not impressive. Because when you act with that kind of independence, your sense of worth becomes unshakable. You no longer need someone else to tell you you're enough. You know it, because you've shown up again and again, even when it was hard, even when it was quiet. That's another key lesson from Marcus, that leadership is not about control, it's about example. You don't lead people by force. You lead by clarity, by steadiness, by consistency, by being the person others can count on, even when no one's looking. He led like that, not with flashy speeches or grand gestures, but with consistency, with care, with a willingness to do the hard work over and over, the unglamorous part, the part behind the scenes. And that's a model we need more of, in families, in friendships, in workplaces, people who don't lead for attention, but because they believe in doing right, people who aren't addicted to credit, who can be kind without posting about it, who can work hard without being clapped for, who can guide others without needing to be called a leader. This mindset also makes you more resilient, because when you tie your effort to praise, you become fragile. The moment praise fades, so does your motivation. But when your effort is tied to values, it lasts. You keep going, even in silence, even in doubt, even when no one cheers. That's where strength is born. Marcus would often come back to the image of a horse running its race, not because of a whip, not for a trophy, but because that's what it was made to do. That's how he saw his role. Whether praised or blamed, he would do what was needed, because that was his nature. And what's beautiful about this is that it gives your life meaning in every season, even when things are slow, even when your work feels unnoticed, even when progress feels invisible. Because you know, I am showing up. I am doing my part. I am aligned with who I want to be. And that is enough. It also frees you from bitterness. When others get credit they didn't earn, when people misunderstand you, when effort goes unacknowledged, you don't have to let it poison you, because your work wasn't for them. It was for something deeper, and that keeps you light. Marcus also warned himself not to get addicted to identity. Even as emperor, he reminded himself, you are only a man, a piece of the universe. Do your role, then step back. That's powerful, because even the highest title didn't own him. He didn't let his role become his ego. He knew leadership is temporary. That status doesn't last. So the only thing that really matters is how you carried yourself. Did you stay just? Did you stay patient? Did you use your position to help others or to glorify yourself? These are the questions that follow you, not your resume, not your awards. So whether you lead a team or a family, whether you run a company or just try to keep your own life in order, this principle applies. Do it quietly. Do it fully. Do it without waiting for applause. Because those who lead without being seen often lead the most. They set the tone. They build the culture. They hold the line when no one else will. And they do it not for recognition, but because their soul demands it. This kind of leadership builds legacy, not the kind written in history books, but the kind written in the hearts of those you touch. The children who watched you stay calm in a crisis. The colleague who remembered your small act of kindness. The stranger you helped and forgot about. You may not know the ripple you caused, but it's there, in quiet waves, in unseen influence, in the lives that changed because you chose to act without needing thanks. That's the kind of life Marcus Aurelius tried to live, not loud, not flashy, but steady, grounded, devoted. And now the same path is in front of you, to do your duty, to lead with your values, to serve where you are, to act without applause, to be the example you wish others would become. Let others chase the spotlight. You, stay in the light of your own truth, because in the end you'll know, not because they praised you, but because you didn't betray yourself. When you lead quietly, when you act rightly without needing praise, you begin to notice something else rising inside you, a certain unshakable stillness, a place that doesn't move even when the world shakes. It doesn't scream, it doesn't boast, but it's there, constant, watching, steady. This is what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, the stronghold of the soul, not a castle built from stone, but from discipline, not guarded by weapons, but by clarity. This was the deepest part of Marcus, the place no insult could reach, no betrayal could crack, no loss could destroy, and he didn't inherit it. He built it, one thought at a time, one honest action after another, through silence, through self-examination, through patient resistance to the chaos of life. While others chased power on the outside, he fortified peace on the inside. That was his real empire. Because he knew the truth. If your mind is not protected, then nothing else is. And if your mind is steady, then nothing else can break you. This idea is one of the most powerful in all of Stoic philosophy, that your true refuge, your real defense, is always within you. It is not your money, not your titles, not your relationships. Those can be taken, they can change, but the citadel of the mind, that is yours, and if you build it strong, it becomes your shelter in every storm. Marcus reminded himself of this again and again, that the external world is unpredictable, unfair, messy, that people will lie, things will fail, plans will fall apart. But none of that has the power to destroy you, unless you let it inside. He wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." So what are you painting with? If your thoughts are scattered, bitter, shallow, your inner citadel becomes weak. But if your thoughts are clean, grounded, focused, then no attack from the outside can shake what you've built. This wasn't just a theory for Marcus. He faced betrayal from those close to him. He faced plague, war, personal loss, and deep fatigue. And yet, he kept returning to that quiet strength inside, that center that reminded him, you cannot control what happens, but you can control how you meet it. And that's where the construction begins, in your daily response. When someone wrongs you and you choose not to retaliate, when your plans collapse and you choose not to panic, when you feel misunderstood and you choose not to crumble, these are the bricks, these are the walls, these are the choices that shape your mental fortress. The inner citadel isn't a place of escape. It's not detachment in the sense of running away. It's engagement from a place of clarity. It's being fully present in life, but not overwhelmed by it. Fully aware of the pain, but not destroyed by it. Because you know where your center is, and you return to it again and again. This is why Marcus placed so much importance on self-reflection. He wrote daily, not to be read, but to stay honest. He used writing as a way to audit his mind, to catch ego creeping in, to clean out resentment before it poisoned him. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be stable. He knew that the world doesn't get easier. You get stronger, and the strength doesn't come from avoiding life. It comes from facing it directly, with the right tools. And one of those tools is awareness. Being able to notice your thoughts without becoming them. Being able to watch your reactions without obeying them. This is what the Stoics meant when they said, "Don't be carried away by impressions." You can feel the pull of anger, but not act on it. You can hear the whisper of fear, but not give it the wheel. You can be hurt, but not undone. That's the real meaning of invulnerability. Not that you don't feel, but that your values stay firm. That your identity doesn't shift with public opinion. That your peace doesn't depend on perfect conditions. Building this kind of mind takes practice. It takes choosing silence over reaction, patience over panic, discipline over comfort. And it's not always exciting. Sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's lonely. But over time, it adds up. And what you gain is priceless. A kind of inner stillness that no one can steal. This is also why Marcus emphasized simplicity, not just in lifestyle, but in thought. He wanted clarity, clean lines, direct truth, because the more clutter in the mind, the weaker the foundation. He didn't chase a million opinions. He filtered. He edited. He focused. You can see it in how he wrote, short sentences, clear principles, no fluff, because he was training his mind to be sharp, not distracted, focused, not pulled in every direction. The fewer things you allow to shake you, the more stable you become. He also reminded himself of nature, not as decoration, but as a teacher. Trees lose their leaves without resistance. The sun rises without complaint. The ocean accepts the storm and keeps moving. Nature doesn't argue, it endures. And Marcus believed we could do the same if we return to our natural strength, the part of us that accepts reality without collapse. That's what the inner citadel protects. Not your comfort, but your capacity to face truth, to respond with virtue, to keep your footing when everything around you is shifting. And this brings us to another key insight. You do not need to control the world. You need to control your responses to it. This flips the way most people think. Most are trying to fix the world so they can feel safe, change others, rearrange life, remove all conflict. But Marcus knew that path never ends. There's always another threat, another frustration, another failure. The better path is this: build your strength so those things lose their power over you. He knew this wouldn't make life easy, but it would make it meaningful. Because now you are no longer pushed around by every emotion. You are no longer a slave to every fear. You are no longer reactive to every inconvenience. You've built something inside, and that structure holds you when nothing else does. This also gives you freedom, because once your peace comes from within, the world can't take it from you. You stop needing approval. You stop fearing rejection. You stop chasing validation, because your stability doesn't depend on other people's behavior. It depends on your own alignment. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. Stoicism is not coldness, it's control. You can feel deeply, care fully, without letting those feelings own you. That's the strength of the inner citadel. It lets you feel through things, not be drowned by them. Marcus knew that each challenge was a test, not from the gods, but from life itself. A chance to prove. Have you built your fortress? Can you stand your ground? Can you act with reason, even when emotions storm the gates? And when he failed, he didn't collapse. He reflected, he wrote, he recalibrated, because even building a citadel takes patience. It's not built in one day, it's carved from experience, from missteps, from trying again. He also warned against letting flattery into the walls. Not just criticism, but praise can weaken your citadel, if you let it define you. Because once you start believing the compliments, you start fearing their absence. So Marcus reminded himself, stay humble, stay inward, stay true. He built his citadel so well that even when Rome was burning from within, he remained calm. When others panicked, he planned. When others blamed, he took responsibility. Not because he felt no fear, but because he had trained himself to respond with strength instead of collapse. That training is available to you too. Every day gives you the materials. Someone cuts you off, don't react. Place a brick. A delay ruins your plans. Don't spiral. Place another brick. You feel tempted to seek approval. Resist. Another brick. These small choices, repeated over time, build something solid. This fortress is not about building walls against people. It's about building space for wisdom. So you can hear clearly, think clearly, act clearly, even when the world outside is chaotic. And when you live like this, others feel it. They don't see the citadel, but they feel its strength. Your calm under pressure, your kindness in conflict, your clarity in confusion. And maybe, just maybe, it inspires them to start building too. Because in a world that pulls us in every direction, the rarest kind of person is the one who knows who they are and stands firm in that truth. who can face loss without losing themselves, who can be hurt without becoming hard, who can walk through storms and still carry light. That's what Marcus Aurelius built. And now you can build it too. Strength begins inside. The deeper it is built, the calmer you remain when everything on the outside breaks apart. But even the strongest inner citadel stands under one shadow, one truth that no wall can stop, no wealth can avoid, and no wisdom can escape. That truth is death. Marcus Aurelius did not run from this. He didn't silence it. He looked straight at it, and instead of fear, he found clarity. Instead of sadness, he found sharpness. This wasn't about dwelling in darkness. It was about making life lighter, cleaner, more urgent, and more honest. He reminded himself daily that he was going to die, not in a dramatic, theatrical way, but in a matter-of-fact tone, like someone pointing to the sunrise. This was the practice of memento mori. Remember that you must die. And to him it wasn't morbid. It was medicine. It was the most direct way to cut through distractions and return to what matters. Because when you forget death, you start wasting time. You delay the apology. You hold on to resentment. You spend your days chasing status, complaining about things you can't change, waiting for some day. But when you remember death, excuses begin to dissolve. You realize that someday isn't guaranteed, that what you're doing today is either part of the life you want or time you'll never get back. Marcus wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." He wasn't being dramatic. He was being exact. Life is not a promise, it's a loan, and we don't know when it will be collected. This awareness didn't make him anxious. It made him clear. It helped him prioritize. It helped him forgive faster, speak more honestly, act more justly. Because when you keep death in view, you stop living like you're immortal. You stop putting off your values. You stop clinging to things you can't carry with you. He saw death not as a thief, but as a teacher. It teaches you that everything is on loan, your body, your relationships, your possessions, even your name. And when you accept that, you start holding things more gently. You stop squeezing. You start appreciating what's here instead of always reaching for more. That's why Marcus often reminded himself that even the longest life is brief, that even emperors are forgotten, that even the great thinkers and conquerors turned to dust. Not to minimize their efforts, but to remind himself not to depend on memory for meaning. It's not about being remembered, it's about being real. This is what allowed him to act with urgency without panic. He knew time was running out, but he didn't waste it on fear. He used that pressure as fuel. If today was all he had, how would he speak? How would he carry himself? What would he refuse to say? What would he stop worrying about? Memento mori gave him perspective. It helped him avoid pettiness, helped him walk away from arguments that didn't matter, helped him ignore gossip, helped him resist bitterness. Because none of those things are worth your limited hours. He wasn't obsessed with death. He was aligned with it. He used it as a compass. If something wouldn't matter on his deathbed, he trained himself to not let it matter too much today. That's how you live wisely. Not by fearing death, but by respecting it. This kind of mindset also helped him deal with the death of others. As emperor, as a father, as a human being, he experienced loss often. But he reminded himself, no one was promised more time than they were given. No one is owed a long life. So while grief is natural, resistance to loss is not helpful. This didn't mean he stopped loving. It meant he loved more deeply while he could. Because when you know something can end at any moment, you stop taking it for granted. You say the thing you are holding back. You notice the details. You give the compliment. You show up fully. Death becomes a reminder to live, not louder, not faster, but more honestly. Marcus saw clearly that fearing death is one of the fastest ways to ruin life. It makes you chase distractions, makes you avoid reflection, makes you hide in routine. But when you accept death, you become focused. You live more deliberately. You waste less time pretending things are fine when they're not. He often wrote about how death makes us equal, that the rich, the powerful, the famous, the forgotten, all meet the same end. And this equality can be freeing. It reminds us that no one is truly ahead of anyone else. We're all walking the same path. Some just walk it more awake. He used this thought to dissolve jealousy. Why envy someone who's just as temporary as you? Why compare your life to someone else's highlight reel when both of you will be dust before long? This kind of clarity protects you from wasting time in the trap of comparison. Marcus also warned against delaying your growth. He would ask himself, how much longer will you wait to demand the best of yourself? Because we always think there's more time, but there isn't always. We assume we'll be ready next year, or after the job changes, or when we're less tired. But life doesn't wait, and wisdom doesn't bloom under delay. This is where mortality becomes a motivator, not in the sense of panic, but in the sense of presence. When you treat each day as rare, you stop treating it like filler. You stop thinking you have time to be careless, or dishonest, or stuck. You stop numbing your awareness just to make the hours pass faster. You begin to ask better questions. What do I want to leave behind? Not in the world's memory, but in the lives I touch. How can I speak more truth today? How can I show love in a way I won't regret? What do I need to stop avoiding? Marcus also used this awareness to stay humble, because when you see your own end clearly, you lose the hunger for superiority. You're not here to impress. You're here to live with integrity. He saw that even the worst pain loses some power in the face of mortality, because no pain lasts forever. Even the hardest seasons pass. Even grief becomes quieter. And knowing that doesn't minimize suffering. It puts a boundary around it, helps you survive it. This also helped Marcus focus on what he could control. Death is the ultimate proof that we don't run the universe. So while others resisted the flow of life, he adapted. While others chased immortality through legacy, he returned to simplicity, to small daily acts of virtue, to the quiet courage of just being honest, useful, and kind, again and again. He often wrote that death is natural, not something to fear, but something to expect. It's like returning to the earth, like a leaf falling when its season ends, and that image brings peace, because what ends returns, what dies gives way to what's next, and you are part of that pattern, not above it. This acceptance also helped him let go of regret, because when you focus too much on the past, you're not respecting the time you still have. Marcus knew that memory is not where life happens. Life happens now, and death sharpens now like a blade. He didn't use this mindset to rush or stress. He used it to choose, to keep choosing each moment, not out of fear, but out of clarity. When you live like this, death no longer stalks you. It stands beside you, reminding you to live well, to speak carefully, to use your time like it's valuable, because it is. This doesn't mean pushing yourself constantly. It means aligning. If rest is needed, rest with intention. If silence is needed, be quiet with awareness. If action is needed, act with courage. Because the time you spend is not refundable. Marcus didn't wait to be told when his final hour would come. He assumed it could be soon, and that made him live in such a way that if it did come, he wouldn't need to panic. That's the goal, to live in such a way that when your time comes, you don't feel cheated. You feel ready. That's why Memento Mori is not about being sad. It's about being serious, about not postponing life, about not being asleep at the wheel. The clock is ticking, not in a threatening way, in a clarifying way. It's asking you, what do you want this hour to mean? When you live with that question, you start taking your life seriously, not in a heavy way, but in a real way. You stop outsourcing meaning. You stop floating. You start arriving to your own life, to the present moment. Marcus did this, not as a saint, but as a man doing his best every day, using the truth of death to shape the truth of how he lived. And you can do the same. When you accept death as your companion, you stop waiting to be brave. You begin living with full attention. No delay, no disguise. But the clarity found in contemplating your end must eventually lead you towards something greater than your own peace. It must lead you outward, to others, to action, to justice. Because the most honest proof that you value life is how you use it for the good of others. Marcus Aurelius knew this. For all his reflection, he never withdrew from responsibility. He didn't use philosophy as an excuse to isolate himself. He stepped into the chaos of politics, into the weight of empire, into the broken systems of human power. And through it all, he fought to remain just. He lived in a world full of corruption, full of flattery, betrayal, manipulation, and cruelty dressed up as policy. He saw friends become enemies. He watched honest men get crushed by greed. He knew what power does to people and what it tempts people to become, and still he didn't run. He stayed. He ruled. Not perfectly, but with effort, with awareness, with a refusal to become like the very forces he resisted. He believed deeply that justice was not optional. It was a duty, a principle that could not bend, even when surrounded by those who twisted it for personal gain. He reminded himself often that being just wasn't about feeling good or sounding noble. It was about acting rightly when no one else did, about making fair decisions even when they cost you, about protecting the dignity of others when it would be easier to turn away. Marcus wrote, "If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it." This was the standard he held himself to, not because it earned him applause, but because it aligned him with his values. He knew that real power meant restraint, that justice begins not in laws or courtrooms, but in individual choices, repeated every day. He also knew that most people in power do not seek virtue, they seek control. And so he watched his own motives carefully. He asked himself, why am I making this decision? Is it because it's easy, because it benefits me, or because it's fair, even if it's inconvenient? These questions helped him stay centered, especially when surrounded by those who saw morality as weakness. Leadership in Marcus's time required more than intelligence. It demanded backbone, because to be just in a corrupt world is to stand alone, to be misunderstood, to be criticized by the very people who benefit from your decisions. Marcus accepted that. He did not expect to be liked. He expected to act in accordance with reason and integrity. He did not pretend that justice always wins. He saw injustice prevail often. But he also understood that your role is not to control the outcomes, it is to commit to the process. You may not fix everything, but you do not add to the harm. You do not become the system you were meant to elevate. Marcus applied this even in personal dealings. If someone lied to him, he did not retaliate with lies. If someone slandered him, he did not use his title to silence them. He chose to lead with calm, not aggression, with facts, not force, not because he was soft, but because he knew that how you win matters just as much as whether you win at all. He believed that being a ruler did not give you more permission to act unjustly. It gave you more responsibility to act with restraint, to hold power without letting it corrupt your decisions, and that meant constantly working on his own impulses, anger, pride, vengeance, all of which could easily masquerade as strength. He had every opportunity to abuse power, to silence dissent, to enrich himself, to surround himself with people who said yes to everything. But instead, he sought truth, even when it was uncomfortable. He consulted people who challenged him. He questioned himself, because he understood. Unchecked power grows blind, and when leaders go blind, everyone suffers. This is where Stoic ethics offered something radical. It didn't promise perfection. It demanded awareness. Marcus used Stoicism not as armor to deflect criticism, but as a compass to guide behavior. He believed the purpose of power was to serve, not dominate, to protect the vulnerable, to reward merit, not loyalty, to maintain order without cruelty. He also knew that systems don't change overnight, that fighting corruption means patience, endurance, quiet strength. Sometimes you have to play the long game, move carefully, choose your battles, stay persistent, even when progress is invisible. Marcus understood that frustration is natural, but giving in to cynicism is surrender. He was surrounded by men who believed that idealism was weakness. That compromise was the only path to stability. But Marcus did not confuse patience with surrender. He understood when to wait and when to act. He stayed principled in situations where shortcuts were easier. He kept his word even when it didn't benefit him anymore. He governed with decency in an indecent world. And most importantly, he knew that you cannot legislate the conscience. You can pass rules, you can enforce laws, but true justice requires leaders who are themselves just. That means examining your intentions, checking your ego, listening before speaking, acting from principle, not pressure. He wrote often about the responsibility of being part of a society. That your role, no matter how small, is part of a larger body. Just as the hand must work with the arm and the heart with the lungs, each citizen must contribute to the well-being of the whole. That doesn't mean blind obedience. It means thoughtful engagement. It means doing your part with care, even if others are careless. This belief extended to everyone, not just the elite. Marcus spoke about universal reason, that each human shares in a greater rationality, a common thread of dignity. He believed that even the poor, the uneducated, the forgotten, had a place in this moral order. Justice to him was not selective. It was based on shared humanity. He practiced this belief in small ways. How he treated servants, how he listened to advisors, how he judged cases, even how he addressed criticism. He didn't see himself as above others. He saw himself as responsible for them. This perspective changed how he saw punishment. He believed justice should correct, not just condemn. That mercy was not a weakness, but a tool of reform. That fairness didn't mean harshness, it meant proportion. He didn't take joy in power. He used it with care because he knew its cost. He also resisted tribalism. He didn't support policies just because his allies did. He didn't attack ideas simply because they came from opponents. He judged arguments on merit. He saw through groupthink. That's what made him dangerous to the corrupt. He couldn't be bought, bullied, or fooled. Even when people acted unjustly toward him, he refused to mirror their behavior. He reminded himself, they act from ignorance. My task is to act from understanding, and in this, he stayed free. Because justice for Marcus was a form of self-respect. To act unjustly would be to betray himself. He also reminded himself that just because the world is broken, that doesn't excuse breaking yourself. Even if corruption is everywhere, even if others cheat or lie, you don't. Not because you're better, but because you've chosen a different path, a harder path, but one that leads to a cleaner mind and a quieter soul. He held himself accountable, not just for his public actions, but for his private motives, because justice starts there, in thought, in intention, in the small, unseen decisions you make when no one is watching. And this is the greatest challenge, not just to believe in justice, but to embody it, to live it when it's costly, to speak it when it's inconvenient, to defend it even when no one thanks you. That's where real leadership lives, not in slogans, not in strategy, but in integrity that holds under pressure. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule perfectly, but he tried. And that effort, that relentless return to principle, is what still echoes today. Not the laws he passed, not the wars he fought, but the steady way he tried to remain just in a world that made justice difficult. And now, in your life, the same test applies. Maybe you're not ruling an empire, but you have influence. In your home, in your work, in your choices. Will you use that influence for convenience or for courage? The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people willing to stand in silence for what is right. More people willing to ask, is this fair? Is this true? Is this necessary? And then act, even if the answer leads to resistance. Because justice is not found in perfect systems. It's found in individual people refusing to be bent by the system they're in. It's found in the quiet decision to speak the truth, to protect the weak, to lift others without needing to be lifted. That is the politics Marcus practiced, not the politics of division or domination, but the politics of virtue lived out in every action. Justice for Marcus Aurelius was not just a public matter. It was a daily test, a test of whether your thoughts matched your actions, whether your values showed up when life got messy. But principles alone are not enough. They need to be practiced, lived, reinforced in quiet moments when the world isn't demanding anything from you. That's why Marcus didn't just write about character, he trained it every single day. He did this through personal rituals, not rituals made of incense or ceremony, but quiet routines that helped him stay grounded. These were habits that anchored him in the storm of leadership, habits that didn't require an audience, habits that made him steady when others became scattered. This wasn't about productivity, it was about presence. Marcus began each day with reflection, not to predict the future, but to prepare for it. He would remind himself, today I will meet people who are selfish, rude, envious, dishonest, and yet I must not become like them. This was his mental armor, not to protect him from others, but to keep him from being changed by them. He didn't expect the world to be easy. He expected to be tested. That's what made his mornings so important. They were not for comfort. They were for clarity, for setting intention, for remembering what he could control and what he couldn't. That mindset shaped every choice he made from the moment he stood up. His morning practice wasn't long, it wasn't complicated, but it was focused. He centered himself by revisiting core truths. that nothing lasts, that pain is often just perception, that acting with kindness costs less than responding with anger. These ideas weren't new to him, but they were necessary to repeat, because the mind forgets under pressure. That's the power of repetition. Not because the lesson changes, but because you do. Life adds pressure. People pull at your patience. The day wears down your strength. That's why Marcus revisited the same themes again and again, not because he lacked understanding, but because he valued reinforcement. His daily self-talk also focused on role and responsibility. He reminded himself, "I am not here to be entertained. I am here to fulfill my purpose. I am a human being gifted with reason, and reason asks me to act with dignity, not impulse." This helped him enter the day with seriousness, not in mood, but in focus. Throughout the day, Marcus used small moments to reset. A pause between meetings, a quiet walk, a breath before speaking. These weren't labeled mindfulness breaks, but that's exactly what they were. Opportunities to return to center, to assess whether he was acting with intention or slipping into habit. He didn't need a perfect environment to stay mindful. He worked in chaos. He lived in tension. But mindfulness doesn't depend on peace around you. It depends on how often you return to awareness. And Marcus returned often. He watched his thoughts like a gardener watches weeds. He caught complaints before they took root. He pulled back from judgment before it hardened. He questioned assumptions before they became beliefs. This wasn't easy work, but it made him clean inside. It made him trustworthy, especially to himself. And when the day ended, Marcus didn't simply fall into sleep. He reviewed. He looked back, not to regret, but to learn. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? Did I live according to my values? Did I speak with honesty? Did I let emotions push me off course? This wasn't self-criticism, it was self-correction, like a craftsman checking his tools, not because he hates his work, but because he wants it to stay sharp. Marcus treated his character the same way, as something to refine, something to return to, even after failure. This kind of nightly audit helped him sleep better, not because every day was perfect, but because he was facing his life directly. No pretending, no hiding, just honest accounting. And from that honesty, he drew strength. He also used this evening reflection to release, to let go of what he couldn't change, to leave tomorrow's problems for tomorrow, to remind himself, "I did what I could with the time I had. Now rest." This ability to release is a part of mindfulness that often gets ignored. We hold on to the day long after it's over. Marcus trained himself to release it. Even his approach to pain followed this pattern. When he felt discomfort, physical or emotional, he didn't panic. He observed. He asked, "Is this pain unbearable or just unpleasant? Can I act despite it? Can I separate what's physical from what I'm adding with thought?" This allowed him to live through hardship without drowning in it. He trained himself to separate facts from interpretation. That's a core Stoic practice. Pain is a sensation. Suffering is a judgment. Delay is an event. Frustration is a reaction. Marcus didn't deny reality. He stripped it of unnecessary drama, and that made space for peace. Throughout his writings, you can feel the rhythm of his practice, the repetition, the returns. He didn't need new lessons each day. He needed reminders, because daily life isn't a series of revelations. It's a test of memory. Will you remember what matters when you're tired, when you're insulted, when you're afraid? His routines weren't rigid. They were adaptive. They served the same purpose, to bring him back to the present, to stop the noise in his head, to bring him out of stories and into action, to stop the drift into ego, to restore the humility of just being a man, doing his best. This is where the depth of his mindfulness shows. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about escaping. It was about being honest enough to stay present even when it hurt, even when it was boring, even when no reward followed. He didn't meditate to feel good. He reflected to stay good, to stay aligned, to stay ready, because he knew life moves fast. And if you don't stop and check in, you lose yourself in it. The beauty of Marcus's routine is that it's available to anyone. You don't need luxury. You don't need silence. You just need commitment. To pause in the morning and remind yourself what matters. To take breaks throughout the day and reconnect. To review your actions at night with honesty, not guilt. That's how mindfulness becomes strength. Not by sitting in a cave, but by practicing awareness in the noise of daily life. In conversation, in failure, in waiting rooms, in traffic, in decision-making. Marcus also reminded himself to expect setbacks, not because he liked suffering, but because he refused to be surprised by it. If you start each day expecting perfection, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. But if you expect challenge, you enter the day ready. This expectation helped him remain calm. When something went wrong, he didn't say, "Why me?" He said, "This is part of the pattern. I prepared for this." That's not cold. That's resilience. That's the kind of mindset built by daily practice. He also trained himself not to need constant stimulation, not to run from silence, not to fear solitude. That's another part of mindfulness that shows up in his writing, the ability to be alone without being lost, to sit with your thoughts without needing to distract yourself. This helped him stay honest, because silence reveals what noise hides, and when you face that silence often, you stop being afraid of your own mind. You learn to lead yourself. You learn to recognize when you're drifting and to bring yourself back. Marcus didn't wait for big crises to use these practices. He didn't wait for breakdowns. He used them every day. So when hard times came, he wasn't starting from zero. His mind was trained. His emotions were tempered. His direction was clear. That's why his writings don't read like lectures. They read like someone whispering reminders to himself in the dark, gentle, firm, repeating the truths he didn't want to forget. Because in the noise of the world, the greatest danger is forgetting who you are. His rituals helped him remember. And now they can help you do the same. Daily rituals helped Marcus Aurelius return to himself again and again. They were the anchor that held him steady in uncertainty. But even the most inward-focused man, one who polished his thoughts in solitude, understood that real philosophy must extend beyond the self. It must show up in how you treat others. That's where Stoicism becomes more than discipline. It becomes justice. And justice, for Marcus, could not be confined to tribe, nation, or personal benefit. It had to stretch to all of humanity. This is the side of Marcus that many people overlook. His belief in universal brotherhood, that every person you meet, stranger, servant, enemy, is part of the same human family. That no one is born to be used, that no one's value is less just because their birth, language, or station in life differs from yours. He didn't say this to sound noble. He believed it with conviction. For him, the logic was clear. All human beings are born with reason. And reason is the shared flame of the gods, the divine spark, the common thread that connects us. This shared nature means we are not meant to live in conflict. We are meant to cooperate, to support, to understand. He wrote that just as your hands are meant to work together, so are human beings. That a hand that hurts the body is harming itself, and a person who harms another for selfish gain or ignorance is doing the same. When you forget that we are made for each other, you forget your purpose. This belief was radical in a time when most people thought in terms of class, bloodline, empire. It still feels radical today because division sells. Fear is easy. But Marcus pointed to something quieter and more powerful. The undeniable connection between every person who breathes. And this wasn't just a poetic idea. It shaped his behavior, how he spoke to those beneath him, how he thought about foreign nations, how he judged the worth of a person, not by title or fame, but by their character and actions. To Marcus, dignity was not earned through achievement. It was granted by nature itself. That's why he warned against cruelty, arrogance, and indifference. He saw them not just as failures of kindness, but as failures of logic. Because when you hurt someone, when you mock or exploit, you're not acting according to reason. You're acting against it. You're forgetting that your mind and theirs are made of the same material. He understood that people would behave badly, that some would steal, lie, or betray. But even then, he said, respond with understanding, not approval, but clarity. If someone is lost in ignorance, your role is not to destroy them. It's to act in a way that does not add more harm, to lead by example, to stay kind without becoming naive. He saw anger not as power, but as a sign of confusion. When you understand that people act from pain, from fear, from habit, then you start to respond differently. You don't excuse wrongs, but you don't lose your soul trying to punish them. This was not softness, it was strength with direction. This belief also helped him resist tribal thinking. He didn't limit his concern to Romans. He saw value in every human being, regardless of culture. This doesn't mean he was free of the mindset of his time, but he stretched beyond it. He pushed against the idea that some lives mattered more than others. He believed that being born in a different region or raised under different gods did not make someone less human. He viewed the whole world as one city, and everyone in it as a citizen. This mental map allowed him to lead not with bias, but with balance. He didn't ask what group a person belonged to. He asked what principles they lived by. This mindset also shaped how he saw leadership. A ruler's role wasn't to dominate, but to serve, to use power to protect, not to privilege. Because if we are all brothers and sisters, then authority comes with deeper responsibility, not more freedom to harm. He reminded himself not to act out of superiority. Even as emperor, he believed he was no more important than the farmer or the soldier. His body would rot like theirs. His voice would fade like theirs. The only thing that truly mattered was how he acted, whether he did what he could, with the role he was given, to contribute to the larger whole. This sense of unity extended into how he handled disagreements. He didn't argue for victory. He argued for understanding. If someone was wrong, he didn't try to embarrass them. He tried to speak to the part of them that could still reason, because truth is not served by humiliation. It's served by clarity, by calm, by shared reflection. He also wrote about how division starts in the mind. When we label others as enemies, as stupid, as evil, we disconnect. And that disconnection feeds hate. But if you remember that even the cruelest person is still a human being, still part of the whole, then something in your heart stays soft. You stay grounded in compassion, even while being firm in principle. He knew that shared nature doesn't mean shared behavior. People still make harmful choices, but shared nature means we can still choose not to return harm with harm. We can set boundaries, speak truth, walk away, but we don't have to hate. We don't have to add more poison to the world. This is one of the deepest strengths Stoicism offers, not just emotional resilience, but ethical clarity. The ability to say, I will not become like what I oppose. I will not mirror cruelty. I will not divide the world into us and them, because the moment I do, I betray the truth I claim to believe in. Marcus believed that justice was not possible without this mindset. If you think only your group deserves care, then your justice will always be warped. It will serve your team, your tribe, your interests, but not truth. But if you start from the idea that we are all bound by a shared origin, then your decisions will be fair. Your actions will be balanced. This view also shaped how he approached service. He didn't just serve Rome, he served humanity. He didn't just think about policy, he thought about principles. He didn't ask, will this make me popular? He asked, will this bring people closer to virtue, to dignity, to understanding? This is what made his leadership different. It wasn't just effective, it was ethical. And ethics begins with empathy. Not the kind that gets lost in emotion, but the kind that stands on reason. That says, this person is like me in the most important ways. We are not enemies by nature, only by choice. This principle matters today more than ever. The world is loud with division. People are sorted by labels. Arguments replace dialogue. Identity replaces intention. But Marcus offers a reminder. Underneath every belief, every disagreement, is a person with a mind. A person with fear, with desire, with potential. He's not asking you to agree with everyone. He's asking you not to forget their humanity, not to reduce people to their worst opinions, not to become blind to the possibility that reason still lives inside them. Even when faced with cruelty, he called for justice without rage, correction without hatred, and that requires more strength than violence, because anyone can hate, anyone can strike. But it takes discipline to understand. It takes clarity to stay fair when others are not. Marcus also reminded himself often that people do wrong out of ignorance, not malice. That they act badly because they think it serves them, not because they're evil by nature. And while that doesn't erase consequences, it changes how you carry the weight of conflict. You stay clean. You don't let their error become your excuse for injustice. That's why Marcus's view of brotherhood wasn't emotional. It was rational. It wasn't about liking everyone. It was about acting in a way that preserved the dignity of the human connection. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. This belief allowed him to govern with calm, to listen when others screamed, to pause when others punished, to build when others tore down, because he wasn't moved by bias. He was guided by something higher, the idea that we are all fragments of the same source. And from that source comes duty. A duty to live with care, to treat others not as threats, but as fellow travelers, not as background noise in your story, but as central to the story we all share. This isn't easy. It asks more of you, but Marcus shows that it can be done, that you can live in a world filled with anger and still choose reason, that you can feel disappointment and still choose fairness, that you can walk through broken systems and still choose to act with unity. Because the world won't change by itself. It changes when people act like what they believe is true, when they live their philosophy, not just speak it. And Marcus Aurelius, through war, loss, illness, betrayal, and power, chose to live this truth, that every human is your kin, that dignity is not earned, it is recognized, that justice begins not in courtrooms, but in the heart that sees clearly. Recognizing every human as your kin reshapes the way you move through life. It humbles your pride, it softens your judgments. But even when you view others as equals, injustice still finds its way into the world. People still lie, they still cheat, they still betray. And this is where the Stoic path becomes most difficult, because it asks you not to respond to injustice with rage, but with reason. Marcus Aurelius had every excuse to be bitter. He was betrayed by people he trusted. He was surrounded by political maneuvering, manipulation, and personal attacks. He ruled in a time of war, plague, and unrest. His choices were often questioned, his authority challenged, and his efforts twisted. Still, he made a conscious decision not to let anger define him. He knew that rage might feel powerful in the moment, but it always leaves a mess behind. It poisons thought. It clouds judgment. It leads to actions you regret and words you can't take back. So he chose something harder. He chose restraint. Not silence, not surrender. Restraint. The kind of restraint that lets you confront what is wrong without becoming a part of the same chaos. He reminded himself that anger is often born from false expectations, from the belief that people should behave differently, that they should know better. But Marcus knew better than that. He accepted that people are flawed, that some act from ignorance, others from pain, and a few simply from selfishness. But none of that gave him permission to lose control. He wrote that injustice harms the person who commits it more than the one who suffers it, because it corrupts the soul of the wrongdoer. That was his way of maintaining his peace. If someone slandered him, he didn't need to return the insult. He simply reminded himself, their behavior reflects them, not me. Their choices are their burden to carry. This didn't mean he allowed wrongdoing to go unchecked. It meant he responded with clarity instead of fury. He believed deeply in justice, but not in revenge. And that difference is critical. Justice seeks what is right. Revenge seeks satisfaction. One corrects, the other punishes. One restores balance. The other tips the scale again in the opposite direction. Marcus believed that meeting injustice with more injustice creates a cycle that never ends. You might win the argument, but you lose your own values in the process. And if your values are lost, then no external victory can make up for the internal cost. This principle is what made his leadership different. He didn't just judge others, he judged himself first. He asked, "Am I being fair? Am I seeing the full picture? Am I reacting from ego or from reason?" These questions helped him pause. They gave him space to act deliberately rather than impulsively. He warned that anger pretends to be strength, but it's actually a sign of weakness, a sign that your peace depends on others behaving properly, a sign that your emotions are being dictated by things outside your control. And that's the opposite of freedom. True strength to Marcus was staying composed in the face of wrongdoing, not because you accept it, but because you refuse to become like it. He was not passive. He took action when needed, but his actions were measured, guided by values, not by emotion. He believed in correcting others without humiliating them. He believed in disagreeing without disrespect. He believed in removing harmful people from positions of power without turning it into a personal crusade. This balance is what Stoicism trains: emotional independence, the ability to respond to chaos without being chaotic, to confront cruelty without becoming cruel, to hold your moral ground even when you stand alone. And Marcus stood alone often, even in his own family, even in his own court. But he didn't use loneliness as an excuse to become bitter. He used it as fuel to deepen his convictions. He knew that staying calm didn't mean you didn't care. It meant you cared enough to stay effective. Because rage makes you reactive. And when you're reactive, you become easy to manipulate. People know how to push your buttons, how to bait you, how to provoke you. But when you respond with steady calm, they lose control over you. You become your own master again. That's what Marcus practiced. Mastery over the one thing he could always control, his mind. He knew that external injustices will always exist. But the greater tragedy is when those injustices invade your character, when you become hard, or cruel, or cynical. He refused to give the world that victory. He reminded himself constantly that we are all part of a larger whole, that nature moves according to reason, not rage. And if we want to live in harmony with nature, we must learn to align our responses accordingly. Even when others are unjust, you must choose to be just. Even when others are loud, you must choose to stay grounded. This is not weakness. It is a higher form of discipline, one that doesn't collapse under pressure, one that doesn't scream when unheard, one that doesn't destroy itself trying to win. It simply stays firm, firm in what is right, firm in what is true. And that firmness speaks louder than anger ever could. Marcus also understood that injustice often stems from ignorance, from people who don't understand the consequences of their actions, or who act from fear, or who were never taught a better way. So instead of condemning them completely, he tried to meet them with clarity, with explanation, with boundaries, but without hatred. He also spoke about injustice that comes from systems, not just individuals. Laws that benefit a few, structures that harm the weak. He didn't pretend these things didn't exist, but he didn't let their presence justify abandoning his ethics. He saw systems as reflections of individual minds, and the only way to change them was to change yourself first. He believed that if enough people lived by principle, the structure would begin to shift. That influence grows not by rage, but by example, by showing a different way, a calmer way, a fairer way. That kind of influence takes longer, but it lasts longer too. Marcus saw that most injustice is made worse by ego, by people who cannot accept that they might be wrong, by people who need to win every debate, who take every disagreement personally, who carry grudges for years. That mindset creates more harm than any single act of unfairness. So he trained himself to forgive, not because others deserved it, but because he deserved peace. He let go of resentment, not because he was weak, but because holding on to anger only drains the soul. He acted without malice, not because he was naive, but because clarity required a clean heart. His self-control was not born from comfort. It was forged in discomfort. He practiced staying calm when everything around him tried to shake him. And that's where the real lesson is. If you only stay calm when life is easy, you're not calm. You're untested. But when life is unjust, and you stay clear, when others lie, and you speak the truth, when you are betrayed, and you still act with integrity, that is Stoicism in motion. This kind of strength is not inherited, it is built. Through repetition, through effort, through failing and returning. It's built by choosing patience when you could lash out, by choosing fairness when you are tempted to seek revenge, by choosing honesty when the easier path is silence. And it's built every time you say, I will not give this situation my soul. I will not let anger make me small. I will not let this person's behavior rewrite who I am. Marcus knew that the world may never be fair, but your character still can be. That's why he turned to philosophy, not to escape the world, but to face it better. He didn't use it to become passive. He used it to become precise, in word, in action, in purpose. And now, so can you. Resisting the pull of anger in the face of injustice is not just about protecting your peace. It's about preserving your example, because whether you realize it or not, someone is always watching how you carry yourself. And no eyes are more observant, more impressionable, or more silently influenced than those of a child. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. While he wrote meditations as private reflections, he likely knew that one day his words would be read, perhaps not by the world, but by his son. In the quiet of night, between campaigns and counsel, Marcus did more than govern an empire. He modeled character. He trained himself not only to lead Rome, but to leave behind a pattern of thought and conduct that his children could follow. He didn't teach virtue with speeches. He taught it by living in alignment with it. He didn't say, "Be brave." He showed how to remain steady during war. He didn't command, "Be just." He demonstrated fairness in judgment. And this is the root of philosophical parenting, not controlling a child's life, but controlling your own life so well that it gives them a map. Because children don't learn from commands, they absorb energy, they copy habits, they reflect the integrity or the contradictions they see. Marcus knew this. That's why his writings are filled with reminders not just to act rightly, but to be someone worth imitating. That's the deepest form of education. He believed that raising a child wasn't about shaping their behavior through fear or reward. It was about shaping their understanding through example and dialogue. Rules might protect the surface, but reflection shapes the soul. And children, even when small, are capable of deep thought, if we respect their ability to think. Marcus likely approached fatherhood with the same mindset he used to govern. Not with domination, but with guidance. Not with strict control, but with steady leadership. He believed in showing rather than shouting. And most importantly, he believed that if a person sees virtue in action, they will naturally be drawn toward it. He would have told his son, "Reason is your highest gift. Use it. Think carefully. Don't follow the crowd. Don't act on impulse. Ask what is in your control and what is not. Ask what is right, not what is easy." These questions, repeated over time, don't force morality. They awaken it. That's why Marcus didn't just preach. He wrestled with himself on the page. He showed his own doubts, his missteps, his corrections. And in doing so, he modeled humility. Because the most dangerous parent is the one who claims to be perfect. The wisest parent is the one who admits they are learning too. He also understood the danger of praise. He warned that flattery weakens the mind, that children, if constantly told they are special, may begin to expect the world to bend for them. He would say, "Don't praise appearance, praise effort. Don't reward obedience, reward thoughtfulness. Teach them to act well, not to be seen, but to be true to themselves." This is why Marcus returned again and again to the value of self-discipline, not as punishment, but as strength. A child who learns to say no to themselves becomes an adult who can say no to peer pressure, to excess, to pride. That's not repression, that's resilience. He believed in teaching children about mortality, not to scare them, but to give them perspective. When a child learns that life is short, They begin to value their time. They treat others with more care. They seek purpose earlier. This kind of awareness matures a young mind more than any lecture. Marcus would have shared stories with his children, not to entertain, but to provoke thought. Stories of people who lived with courage, who faced injustice with composure, who served others without seeking applause. Stories that plant seeds of character without shouting instruction. He also saw the importance of silence. Parents often speak too much and listen too little. But wisdom listens. A child who is heard learns how to hear others. They learn that dialogue matters, that questions are not a threat, that disagreement does not mean disapproval. Marcus practiced this with his counselors. He likely did the same with his family. He didn't shield his children from hardship. He saw value in struggle, in learning to carry weight, in understanding that comfort is not the goal of life. He wanted his son to grow not in luxury, but in integrity, because comfort fades, character doesn't. That's why Marcus emphasized daily habits. He believed in repetition, not of tasks, but of thought. He would want his children to start and end each day asking, was I kind? Was I honest? Did I act from reason? These questions don't demand perfection. They train awareness. He also believed in correction, not through anger, but through reasoned conversation. He didn't see discipline as punishment. He saw it as guidance. A child who understands why something matters is far more likely to respect it than one who is simply forced to obey. Marcus knew that fear breeds silence, but understanding creates independence. That's what he wanted. Not a child who fears doing wrong, but one who desires to do right. Not because they're being watched, but because they've internalized what's valuable. This is the deeper purpose of philosophical parenting, not to raise a perfect child, but to help them become their own teacher, to develop inner judgment, to know themselves, to question wisely, to love justice without needing applause, to see the dignity in every person. These traits can't be forced. They must be cultivated with care. He also modeled restraint. He showed that strong people don't always speak. They don't always win. They don't always correct others. Sometimes strength is in silence, in stepping back, in choosing not to dominate a conversation. This example teaches patience better than any rule. He likely encouraged reading, but not for status, for depth, for clarity, for grounding the mind in something greater than gossip or distraction. A child raised on ideas that stretch their thinking will grow to speak carefully and act deliberately. Marcus believed that philosophy wasn't just for scholars. It was for everyone, for the person making decisions at home, for the one facing peer pressure, for the one grieving loss, for the one tempted to cut corners. That includes children. And when introduced gently through daily life, Stoic ideas can grow quietly inside them. He didn't separate intellect from emotion. He believed emotions should be guided, not suppressed. That children should learn to name what they feel, to trace it, to sit with it before acting on it. Emotional awareness is a form of wisdom. It teaches self-trust, and that begins at home. He also believed in showing children how to be useful, not in the sense of chores, but in service. In asking, what can I offer? What needs to be done? This creates a mindset of contribution. A child who learns to help without being asked will one day lead without being told. Marcus would not have promised happiness. He would have promised purpose. Because happiness is fleeting. Purpose endures. He would tell his child, seek meaning, not comfort. Choose the harder right over the easier wrong. And if you fall short, try again. That's enough. He would want his children to understand nature, that life includes loss, that people leave, that plans fall through, but that none of it can destroy who you are inside. He would want them to find strength in accepting what they cannot change, and fire in changing what they can. Marcus also believed that life was a kind of role, that we are all actors on a stage we didn't design, and our task is to play our part well, to play it with grace, courage, and clarity. Whether that role is emperor or student, parent or child. That mindset breeds humility and pride in the right balance. He would have told his children, "You will be challenged, you will be judged, you will fail, but you can choose your response. Always. You can stay calm, you can stay kind, you can choose virtue even when it's difficult. And that choice, repeated daily, is the foundation of a good life." And that's the core of his message, not just for children, but for anyone learning to grow. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be honest. You don't need to control everything. You need to control yourself. You don't need to be brilliant. You need to be steady. The way Marcus lived, the way he wrote, the way he reflected, that was his teaching, not just to Rome, but to his son, and maybe to all of us. The way you live teaches louder than anything you say. That was the thread woven through Marcus Aurelius's understanding of parenting. He believed that the best way to raise strong, thoughtful children was not through punishment or pressure, but through being a living example of resilience, clarity, and calm. But to be that example, you must first train yourself, not in words, in habits. And that training doesn't come in comfort. It comes through discipline, through effort, through facing what's difficult, on purpose. Marcus knew that real strength isn't built in luxury. It's built through hardship, not the kind life throws at you randomly, but the kind you choose for yourself, the voluntary kind, the kind that toughens your mind, sharpens your focus, and builds the kind of resilience that doesn't break under pressure. Because if you only grow when things are easy, you won't last long when they're not. This is why Marcus regularly practiced discomfort, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he understood that if you train yourself to endure little things, you won't panic when the big things come. He slept on hard beds, he ate simple meals, he wore modest clothes, and he reminded himself that he didn't need much to live, that every extra comfort was a bonus, not a requirement. He believed that if you become addicted to comfort, you make yourself fragile. You start needing things to be a certain way just to function. But if you can learn to go without, you gain freedom. You gain power. Because now your peace is no longer tied to external conditions. He also practiced mental austerity. That meant examining his thoughts regularly, catching himself when he started craving recognition or fearing discomfort, asking, "Do I really need this? Is this thought helping me or weakening me? Is this fear real or just habit?" That self-examination was a form of discipline as real as physical training. He knew that the mind, like the body, needs exercise, not just through reading or studying, but through applying restraint, through saying no to things that are easy but pointless, through choosing what's useful over what's pleasurable, through doing what's right even when no one is watching. This is what the Stoics called practicing poverty. Not to glorify suffering, but to prove to yourself that you can survive without luxury. Marcus believed that everyone should, from time to time, go without what they're used to: good meals, warm beds, praise, distraction. Because that kind of self-imposed challenge builds strength faster than any speech. And this practice has another benefit. It teaches appreciation. When you go without something, you stop taking it for granted. When you eat plain food for a week, you start to enjoy the smallest flavors again. When you unplug from entertainment, you rediscover the richness of silence. Voluntary hardship makes life richer, not poorer. Marcus didn't ask this only of himself. He believed leaders should be examples of restraint, that those with power have a duty to show others what self-control looks like, not in theory, in action. He believed that if a ruler chased luxury, the people would follow. But if a ruler embraced simplicity, it could elevate an entire culture. This is how he trained humility, because discomfort reveals how quickly pride dissolves. It reminds you that you are human, like everyone else, that your needs are basic, that your survival doesn't depend on admiration or soft cushions. It depends on your mindset. Marcus reminded himself constantly that fortune can be taken in a day, wealth can vanish, reputation can be ruined, health can decline. But if you've trained yourself to be content with little, none of that can break you. That's the shield voluntary hardship builds, not to escape life, but to face it more completely. He would reflect on the lives of those who lived with purpose despite having less. The farmers who rose early and worked with dignity, the soldiers who carried their burdens without complaint, the philosophers who walked with holes in their cloaks but clarity in their minds. These people were rich in what mattered: strength, self-respect, discipline. Voluntary hardship also keeps you honest. When you choose to do something difficult each day, you lose the need to prove yourself with words. You begin to trust your own actions, and that quiet self-trust becomes a kind of internal gravity. You walk differently. You speak with less noise and more weight. Marcus believed that the body should be treated with respect, but not indulged. He wrote that luxury makes the soul soft, that chasing comfort makes you weak, but embracing effort, especially when unnecessary, turns you into the kind of person who can stay upright when life gets heavy. This doesn't mean punishing yourself. Stoicism isn't about pain for the sake of pain. It's about freedom. The kind that comes from knowing you don't need the perfect temperature, the perfect praise, or the perfect outcome to keep going. That kind of freedom is rare, but it's earned one small sacrifice at a time. Marcus trained his patience by choosing to wait. He trained his focus by limiting distraction. He trained his endurance by moving through discomfort with calm. And each time he succeeded, he didn't boast. He quietly added one more layer to his character, one more brick to his foundation. He knew that hardship, when chosen wisely, cleans out the clutter. It shows you what matters. It teaches you to find meaning in effort itself, not just in results. To enjoy the simplicity of doing something well, even if it's hard, even if no one sees it. This mindset helps you respond to pressure, because if you've practiced choosing difficulty, real-life stress won't catch you off guard. You'll recognize it. You'll know how to breathe through it. You'll have built the mental muscles to stand still when others panic. It also makes you more empathetic. When you've gone without, you understand those who have less. When you've carried something heavy, you notice when others are struggling. This is how voluntary hardship deepens your humanity, not just your resilience, but your compassion. Marcus didn't want to be seen as above others. He wanted to be useful, and usefulness requires strength, not just physical strength, but moral strength. The kind of strength that resists temptation. That speaks the truth when it's hard. That chooses the right thing over the easy thing, even in private. That's why voluntary hardship isn't a Stoic trick. It's a foundation. It teaches you that pain is part of growth, That sacrifice clears away what you don't need. That struggle isn't a detour from the path, it is the path. Even the smallest discomforts train something important. Waking early when you want to sleep, finishing the task when you're tired, resisting the urge to complain, choosing water over wine, silence over argument. These things seem small, but each one builds a brick of strength inside you. Marcus lived this way not because he wanted admiration, but because he wanted to be free. Free from need, free from fear, free from the kind of fragile happiness that disappears the moment life stops being convenient. And in that freedom, he found clarity. He could see what truly mattered. He could speak with conviction. He could endure storms without bitterness, because he had already faced smaller ones on purpose. He reminds us that you don't have to wait for life to challenge you. You can challenge yourself, not dramatically, not recklessly, but consistently. You can train yourself to need less and give more, to slow down and listen, to stay calm while you're waiting. These are the tests that build the version of you that won't fall apart when things go wrong. Voluntary hardship is not about being tough, it's about being ready. It's about preparing your soul for the weight of reality. Not to fear it, but to stand in it, fully. That's how Marcus lived. And that's the kind of strength anyone can build. Choosing difficulty on purpose reshapes your character. It stretches what you believe you're capable of and clears away everything you don't truly need. But voluntary hardship wasn't where Marcus Aurelius stopped. He understood that the harder challenge wasn't pain, it was pleasure. Because suffering may wound the body, but pleasure is what seduces the soul. And that's what made it more dangerous. He feared indulgence more than discomfort. Not because he believed pleasure was evil, but because he saw how it slowly made people forget who they were. He believed pleasure, when unexamined, chains a person more subtly than any hardship ever could. It doesn't strike you down, it lulls you. It softens your edge. It whispers that comfort is the goal and that anything unpleasant must be avoided at all costs. And that mindset, Marcus knew, leads not to freedom, but to slavery. He wrote that the person who cannot go without pleasure is not free, because now they are owned by whatever gives them relief. Whether it's luxury, praise, attention, or distraction, if you need it to feel okay, you're no longer in control. You've handed your peace to something that exists outside of you. This belief didn't make Marcus joyless. He wasn't against beauty, food, or celebration. He simply believed they should be enjoyed with discipline. That moderation, not deprivation, was the path to stability. He saw clearly that chasing pleasure for its own sake pulls you away from purpose. It makes you reactive, addicted, dependent on things you can't guarantee. And anything that can be taken from you can become your master. That's why Marcus constantly reminded himself to keep his desires in check, not to punish himself, but to protect his clarity, because he knew how easily pleasure distorts perception. When something feels good, people stop asking whether it's right. They confuse pleasure with truth, comfort with wisdom, and ease with value. He wrote that it's not pain that corrupts the soul, but surrendering to pleasure without thinking. Because once you stop questioning what you enjoy, you risk becoming a servant to it. And a person who serves their cravings can't serve anything higher. Not truth, not justice, not integrity. This was one of the reasons Marcus kept his lifestyle simple. Even as emperor, he resisted excess. He avoided elaborate clothing, extravagant meals, flattery, and constant praise. Not because he was trying to appear virtuous, but because he didn't want his senses to take control of his mind. He knew that pleasure has a way of making you forget what matters, until suddenly you're chasing satisfaction instead of meaning. He believed that true freedom is the ability to enjoy without needing, to take part without being consumed, to let go without regret. That only happens when you train restraint, not by saying no to everything, but by understanding what's enough. Marcus also knew that pleasure often hides weakness, that those who seek constant stimulation are usually running from something: boredom, fear, self-doubt. And instead of facing those feelings, they cover them with more pleasure. But nothing you consume can silence what you refuse to confront. And that's why Marcus chose to sit with discomfort, because it forced honesty. He practiced asking, "Why do I want this? What am I trying to avoid? Who am I when no one is rewarding me?" These questions helped him see the difference between healthy enjoyment and unconscious indulgence, between choosing and craving, between freedom and addiction. His thoughts on pleasure were closely tied to discipline. He didn't want to kill desire, he wanted to understand it. Because once you understand it, you can use it wisely. You can appreciate a good meal without overeating. You can enjoy beauty without needing to own it. You can feel attraction without being ruled by it. You can engage in joy without losing your sense of control. That is what he meant by freedom through restraint. To him, restraint wasn't about control for control's sake. It was about creating space between stimulus and response. That space is where reason lives. Without it, you become a slave to every impulse. But with it, you become someone who moves deliberately, who acts with awareness, who isn't easily shaken or seduced. He also feared the pride that grows from pleasure. When people feel good, they often confuse it with being good. They mistake luck for virtue, success for wisdom, and once that illusion takes root, humility disappears. Marcus believed that nothing is more dangerous to the soul than a false sense of superiority, fed by comfort and unchecked ease. He reminded himself often that pleasure fades quickly, that it does not last, that it brings no lasting meaning, that the moment you've satisfied one desire, another appears, and that the chase never ends unless you decide to stop running. This is where restraint becomes power. The power to say, "I don't need this to feel whole. I don't need more to feel worthy. I don't need every desire to be met." That choice, made over and over, is what creates real strength. It allows you to focus on what truly matters, instead of being pulled in every direction by the latest craving. Marcus also warned that societies fall when leaders become addicted to luxury, when they lose touch with discipline, when they begin to believe they are owed ease. He knew that character decays quietly, and often the first sign is a person who can no longer bear the slightest discomfort without complaint. That's why he saw restraint as the beginning of wisdom, because the person who can resist what they want can also resist what they fear, and the person who can walk away from pleasure can also walk through pain with dignity. This mindset gave him stability in crisis. When things fell apart around him, when people betrayed him, when plans failed, when illness struck, he didn't panic. Because his peace was never built on comfort. It was built on values, values he had tested through restraint. Even his thoughts on love and friendship followed this principle. He believed that love must be free, not possessive, that friendship must be based on virtue, not entertainment, that loyalty must come from character, not shared indulgence. These connections only last when they are not built on what's easy. He believed in joy, but not joy that comes from the outside. Joy that comes from knowing you acted rightly, that you used your time well, that you kept your integrity. This joy is not intense, but it is steady. It doesn't swing like emotion. It grows quietly, with every choice you make in line with your highest values. And this is what he wanted to protect: his inner freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever he pleased, but the freedom to live in a way that made him proud. A freedom that comes from needing less, not getting more. To Marcus, the danger of pleasure wasn't just personal, it was cultural. He saw how civilizations collapse under the weight of indulgence, how people stop asking deeper questions when their appetites are constantly fed, how truth gets replaced by entertainment, how courage fades when comfort becomes the highest value. That's why he wrote not to destroy pleasure, but to keep it in its place, to use it without being used by it, to enjoy it when it comes, but never let it lead. Because what leads you shapes you, and Marcus wanted to be shaped by reason, not reaction. This mindset applies everywhere, in what you eat, in what you buy, in what you say yes to, in how you spend your time. Every decision is a chance to practice restraint, not to deny yourself joy, but to choose lasting peace over temporary thrill. It's also about attention. Pleasure pulls your focus outward. It teaches you to expect stimulation, but restraint turns your attention inward. It helps you listen more, reflect more, act with deeper thought. That inner quiet is where wisdom has room to grow. Marcus knew that you can't always avoid temptation, but you can always decide who you want to be in the face of it. And that decision, made 1,000 times a day, becomes your identity. So the question is not whether pleasure is good or bad. It's whether your relationship to it is healthy or enslaving, whether you use it to enhance life, or whether you've let it replace life, whether you can walk away from it when needed, or whether it owns you completely. Marcus chose restraint not to impress anyone, not to perform, but because he understood what was at stake. That inner liberty is priceless, that clarity is rare, and that nothing is worth giving that up, not a moment of indulgence, not the illusion of escape. This is how you protect your freedom, not by locking yourself away, but by practicing control, by saying no when it counts, by enjoying what you have without needing more, by living in a way that doesn't crumble the moment comfort disappears. Marcus feared pleasure more than pain because he knew pain is obvious. It teaches, it forces reflection, but pleasure, unless checked, disguises decay. And so he made restraint a daily discipline, not to reject joy, but to make sure it didn't become his master. Let's continue. The next insight cuts even deeper. Restraint is not just about resisting indulgence, it's also about knowing when not to speak. After all, the same impulse that makes us chase comfort can also make us rush to fill silence. We fear emptiness. We think we need to respond. We think every moment demands our voice. But Marcus Aurelius saw silence as a kind of strength, a shield for the mind, a filter for wisdom, a discipline as vital as any other. In his life as emperor, silence wasn't just a matter of etiquette, it was survival. Every word could shape a policy, fuel a rumor, start a conflict. In this high-stakes world, Marcus chose his moments carefully. He understood that silence is not the absence of communication. It is a message in itself, and often it speaks with more clarity and dignity than words ever could. He believed that not all truths need to be spoken immediately. Not every opinion must be shared. Not every insult requires an answer. There's dignity in pausing, in letting a conversation breathe, in holding your tongue when emotion is trying to take the lead. Because when you wait, you gain space. And in that space, your reason has a chance to rise. Marcus saw how noise can dilute thought. In politics, in debate, in ordinary talk, people speak to be heard, not always to be understood. They argue to win, not to learn. They fill the air with reactions instead of reflection. And in this constant clamor, meaning gets lost. He chose a different path. He used silence as a filter, a way to refine thought before expression. He often wrote that you should ask yourself, is what I'm about to say necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Will it improve the silence? These weren't rhetorical questions, they were habits, mental checkpoints. Because he knew that once words leave your mouth, you don't control them anymore. They move through people, carrying your character with them. That's why silence, to Marcus, was a form of self-respect. You don't speak just to fill a void. You don't explain yourself to people who don't want understanding. You don't react to every provocation. He understood that silence isn't weakness. It's often the strongest possible answer, not out of pride, but out of discipline. He believed there are moments when silence preserves your energy, when speaking would only drain you, when defending yourself would add nothing but noise, when trying to correct someone who's not listening is a waste of breath. In those moments, silence becomes your boundary. It says, I see clearly, and I choose peace. But this silence wasn't passive. It was active, sharp, and alert. Marcus wasn't withdrawing. He was choosing. He was staying centered. He was observing before acting. Silence in his hands became a strategy. It helped him listen more closely, judge more fairly, and lead more effectively. He saw that in the rush to speak, we often betray our own values. We say things we regret. We make promises we can't keep. We speak from ego instead of wisdom. But when you practice silence, you slow down. You give your conscience time to catch up to your emotions. This also protected him from being manipulated. Because the person who can't stay silent is easily controlled. They reveal too much. They argue out of insecurity. They react instead of deciding. But the one who is comfortable in quiet cannot be baited. They are not pulled into meaningless debates. They stay anchored. Marcus didn't use silence to appear mysterious. He used it to stay honest. If he didn't know something, he preferred to say nothing. If the moment called for calm, he held his peace. And when words were needed, he used them with precision. Not too much, never too little, always just enough. He understood that words lose power when overused, that a sharp thought spoken too quickly can sound hollow, but a well-timed phrase, rooted in silence, can cut through confusion like a blade. That's why he saw silence as a preparation, not a retreat. This mindset extended to how he handled criticism. He didn't answer every attack. He didn't rush to defend his name. He believed that your actions will speak for you more honestly than any reply. That silence in the face of gossip shows more integrity than argument, because if you know who you are, you don't need to keep proving it. He also used silence to manage conflict. When others lost their temper, he held the line. When meetings grew tense, he let others speak first. This wasn't submission. It was strategy. It gave people space to reveal themselves. It gave him time to understand motives, and often it diffused tension better than confrontation ever could. Even in personal grief, Marcus leaned on silence. He didn't dramatize his pain. He didn't use sorrow to draw sympathy. He reflected privately, wrote honestly, and kept his composure. Not because he lacked feeling, but because he respected the depth of those feelings too much to throw them into public spectacle. He wrote that the inner life should be guarded, that not everything sacred needs to be spoken, that some thoughts are meant for your soul alone. This isn't secrecy, it's reverence. The recognition that your inner world is not always meant for public consumption. This silence also protected his clarity. In a world filled with distractions, he carved out space for thought, for reflection, for writing. Because silence, properly used, is not emptiness. It's the soil where insight grows. It allows your deeper thoughts to surface, the ones buried beneath noise, reaction, and habit. He encouraged practicing silence even in success, because celebration can lead to arrogance, and praise, when absorbed without question, becomes addiction. But silence after achievement lets the lesson settle. It keeps the ego grounded. It reminds you that the work is never over. He also knew that silence helps you hear others better, not just their words, but their intent, their fears, their values. When you're not preparing to speak, you're able to truly listen. And from that listening comes connection, not surface-level agreement, but genuine understanding. This skill is rare, especially in leaders. But Marcus believed that power should not make you louder. It should make you more thoughtful. That leadership is not about volume, but about presence. And presence begins with quiet attention. He wasn't silent all the time. He spoke when needed. He gave orders. He guided. He consoled. But he did it from stillness, from a place that had already sifted through the noise and found what needed to be said, and only that. He practiced writing as a form of internal speech. His journals were a kind of structured silence, a place to rehearse his thoughts, to challenge himself, to clean his mind before opening his mouth. That's why Meditations reads not like a speech to others, but a conversation with his better self. This process taught him that silence isn't something you do. It's something you become. It's not just holding your voice. It's holding your judgment, your reactions, your need to be seen as right. It's the stillness that comes when your ego has nothing to prove. And from that stillness, you gain control over your attention, over your time, over your values. Because when you can sit in silence, you can stand in truth. And when you can stand in truth, no noise can shake you. Marcus didn't discover this in theory. He built it word by word, silence by silence, in counsel, in battle, in personal pain. He used quiet not as an escape, but as armor, not to withdraw from life, but to meet it with fewer illusions. He reminds us that not every opinion is worth sharing, not every insult needs answering, not every opportunity to speak is a wise one. That sometimes the greatest service you can offer the moment is your restraint, and in that space, between what could be said and what should be said, character is revealed. Let's continue. The next lesson sharpens this even more. Silence taught Marcus Aurelius to act from depth, not noise. It gave him space to think clearly, to speak with purpose, and to remain undisturbed by the chatter of the world. But beyond the quiet of withheld words, there was something else he practiced just as seriously: gratitude. Not the kind that waits for life to be easy, but the kind that flows freely, even in difficulty. A form of gratitude that doesn't depend on conditions, a way of giving that expects nothing back. For Marcus, gratitude wasn't a feeling. It was a philosophy, a deliberate choice to see clearly, to appreciate fully, and to release the need for others to respond in any particular way. He believed that joy is not found in getting more, it's found in needing less. And when you strip away expectation, you uncover a form of thankfulness that's unshakable. He gave because it was the right thing to do, not because it would make people like him, not because he hoped for recognition, not because it made him feel superior, but because he understood that every act of virtue is its own reward. When you give from alignment, not ego, the outcome loses its grip on you. He wrote that if you do good and expect a reward, you're not really giving, you're trading. And a transaction is not a moral act, it's business. Marcus wasn't interested in building a life based on debt, obligation, or emotional bookkeeping. He gave without strings, without scorekeeping, without conditions. This kind of giving requires strength, because most people want acknowledgement. They want their effort to be seen, their kindness to be returned, their generosity to be praised. But Marcus knew that the deeper the expectation, the greater the disappointment, and disappointment breeds bitterness. So he trained himself to expect nothing, not out of coldness, but out of clarity. Because when you give without needing anything back, you stay in control of your peace. You don't become resentful. You don't feel used. You simply acted from your values, and that's enough. This principle also helped him receive without entitlement. When someone gave him kindness, he didn't treat it as his due. He treated it as a gift. And a gift, by definition, is not something you can demand. He appreciated it fully, but he didn't build his self-worth on it. Gratitude, for Marcus, meant recognizing the gift of being alive at all. That every breath, every sunrise, every small moment of clarity is not guaranteed. That nothing in life is owed. And when nothing is owed, everything becomes a bonus. He reminded himself often that people are not perfect, that they forget, that they fail, that they miss opportunities to show up. But none of that could rob him of his ability to stay thankful, because his gratitude wasn't directed at results. It was rooted in principle. He even found gratitude in hardship, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because every difficulty was a chance to grow, a chance to exercise patience, courage, or discipline. He saw challenges as teachers, not punishments. And when you see life that way, you stop waiting for things to go your way to be grateful. This mindset allowed him to stay light, to move through life without dragging around invisible ledgers, without holding grudges against those who didn't return favors, without becoming cold when generosity went unnoticed. Because when you give with expectation, your heart becomes a contract, but when you give freely, it becomes an offering. He knew that the ego hates this kind of giving. The ego wants applause. It wants to be seen as generous. It wants to be admired. But Marcus didn't let his ego lead. He gave in secret. He helped without drama. He let his actions speak, and he let them go. That's why his version of gratitude wasn't about saying thank you out loud. It was about living in a way that honored what he'd been given. He didn't waste time. He didn't waste breath. He didn't waste chances to be useful. That was his thanks. He also saw that gratitude wasn't just for big things. It wasn't just about fate sparing your life or fortune smiling on you. It was about the smallest details. A kind word, a moment of peace, a chance to reflect. These little moments, when noticed, make life full. When missed, they make life feel empty, even when everything seems perfect on the surface. Marcus believed that gratitude sharpens the mind. It trains you to focus on what you have rather than what you lack. And that focus is a kind of wealth. It makes you rich in awareness. It makes you generous in spirit. It makes you harder to shake. This also shaped how he dealt with people who wronged him. He didn't let one act of betrayal erase years of goodwill. He didn't let one disappointment define a whole relationship. He could remember what someone failed to do, but he never forgot what they once did right. Gratitude in this way preserved his balance. He wrote that the person who remains thankful through adversity is unbreakable, because they see beyond the moment. They see life as a whole, not as a series of emotional wins and losses. They don't depend on perfect days. They depend on steady perspective. And perspective was Marcus's anchor. He often asked himself, how many blessings do I overlook simply because I'm distracted by what's missing? How much of my suffering comes from comparison, from entitlement, from assuming life should be easier than it is? These questions brought him back to center, to a mindset that wasn't blind to problems, but aware of what remained even in struggle. He practiced noticing the good without needing it to erase the bad. And that's the kind of gratitude that doesn't vanish when life becomes hard. This also made him more generous. When you feel rich in awareness, you don't fear giving. You don't clutch your resources, your time, your attention. You offer them freely because you know their value and because you're not scared of running out. Marcus believed that to live well is to give often, not just money or gifts, but time, presence, understanding, and to do so without demanding anything in return. Because the moment your kindness becomes conditional, it stops being kindness. This way of living created peace, not the kind you get when everyone treats you well, but the kind that grows from acting rightly regardless of how you're treated. That's the peace that can't be disturbed, because it comes from what you give, not what you get. He didn't need gratitude to be expressed in words. He needed to live in a way that felt aligned, and that feeling was its own reward. It didn't require applause. It didn't need to be seen. It just needed to be true. Even when dealing with fate itself, Marcus stayed thankful. He didn't demand explanations. He didn't argue with reality. He simply worked with what he was given. And the more he did that, the more he discovered how little he needed to feel full. Gratitude without expectation is one of the hardest disciplines, because it demands that you let go of what you think you're owed. It asks you to act kindly without being repaid, to forgive without being asked, to notice beauty without needing it to last. But this is also what makes it so powerful. It trains humility. It teaches you that the world does not revolve around your desires. It reminds you that life is not a transaction, but a mystery, and your role in it is not to control, but to respond, wisely, generously, and with open hands. Marcus Aurelius lived with open hands. He gave freely, accepted humbly, and refused to let bitterness take root. His gratitude was not loud, but it was deep. It didn't depend on the world being fair. It depended on him being awake. When you give without expectation, you begin to discover a freedom that most people never reach. A freedom not based on what others give you, but rooted in what you choose to become. That shift, from needing validation to simply living with integrity, is one of the most powerful changes a person can make. Marcus Aurelius didn't rely on praise. He didn't need recognition. He answered to someone far more important, his higher self. He lived each day not to impress a crowd, but to stay aligned with a deeper internal standard. He called this his inner guide, the divine spark within all human beings, the rational soul that knows what is right and calls you toward it. This wasn't abstract spirituality. It was practical ethics, a code of personal excellence that didn't depend on being seen, rewarded, or understood. To Marcus, the most important judgment wasn't from the public, from critics, or from history. It was the quiet voice that asked, did you live today as the person you claimed to be? Did you act from wisdom or ego? Did you live up to your own values, or just go through the motions? That voice was the one he listened to most. This inner tribunal, as he practiced it, was both a guide and a mirror. It didn't punish. It didn't flatter. It simply held up the truth of your choices. In moments of anger, it reminded him to pause. In moments of temptation, it reminded him of consequences. In moments of fear, it reminded him of what he stood for. And unlike the judgment of others, it couldn't be tricked or silenced. He built this voice through daily discipline, through writing, through reflection, through thousands of moments where he chose principle over impulse. He sharpened his ability to listen inward, to consult himself before speaking or acting. He didn't need approval to act well. He acted well to stay whole. This is one of the most overlooked parts of Stoicism. It's not about building armor against the world. It's about building awareness within yourself, so that even in silence, even in solitude, even when no one is watching, you still live with integrity, because that is where character becomes real. Marcus believed that freedom meant being accountable to yourself before anyone else, that your life must be driven by conscience, not applause, and that the most tragic form of failure isn't being misunderstood. It's knowing you betrayed yourself and pretending you didn't. He practiced a kind of internal loyalty, a promise not to speak or act in ways that would break the trust he had with his higher self. That meant saying no to shortcuts. It meant speaking the truth even when it was uncomfortable. It meant taking responsibility without waiting to be forced. This way of living gave him strength, because when you live according to an internal standard, the external world loses much of its power over you. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't crush you. You become grounded, not in public opinion, but in personal clarity. That clarity doesn't come from ambition. It comes from constant self-examination. Marcus would ask himself simple but powerful questions. What did I do today that honored my better self? What did I do that betrayed it? These questions, asked honestly, guide you toward the kind of person you want to be, not just appear to be. He wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. That means your inner dialogue, your intentions, your private decisions, they shape you. Not what you claim to believe, not what you preach to others, but how you act when it's just you and your conscience. This view of life is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. You can no longer blame the crowd or your upbringing or the unfairness of others. You are responsible for your response, for your principles, for your example. That's heavy, but it's also liberating, because now your power is back in your hands. Marcus believed that this higher self was not a fantasy. It was the rational part of you, the part that knows right from wrong without needing a rule book. The part that doesn't argue with truth, but aligns with it. The part that wants to serve, not dominate, to contribute, not consume. He didn't expect to meet this ideal perfectly, but he aimed at it daily. Because excellence is not about reaching a finish line, it's about remaining in pursuit. It's about noticing when you fall and choosing to get back on course without delay. This helped him forgive himself without lowering his standard. He wasn't harsh, but he was honest. He didn't let himself off the hook, but he also didn't carry shame. He corrected, he learned, he moved forward. And this steady process of alignment shaped how he saw success. It wasn't about how much he achieved, but about how cleanly he walked through life. Did he keep his promises? Did he protect those in his care? Did he act with justice, even when no one would have blamed him for acting otherwise? His definition of progress wasn't public, it was personal. Progress meant becoming harder to tempt, quicker to admit fault, slower to react, more consistent in action. He measured it not in years, but in moments, because the real work of becoming happens one choice at a time. He also reminded himself that the world is full of false judges, people who praise what is loud, flashy, or manipulative, people who admire cruelty when it wins, but he refused to be measured by their standards. He knew that dignity doesn't always win applause, but it always leaves you with your soul intact. He believed that the only life worth living was one where your conscience stays clear, where your mind doesn't accuse your own heart, where your habits support your ideals, where you don't have to pretend to be someone else just to be accepted. This required humility, because to grow, you have to admit where you fall short. You have to stop lying to yourself. You have to confront the gap between your intentions and your behavior. And then, with patience, you work to close that gap. Marcus practiced this without drama, quietly, privately, like a craftsman checking his tools, not to show the world how good he was, but to ensure he remained useful, honest, and awake. This kind of inner standard also gave him purpose, because when your goal is excellence, not recognition, you don't need perfect conditions. You don't need approval. You just need commitment, a willingness to keep showing up, a willingness to do the next right thing even when no one notices. And when you live this way, you inspire without trying to. People feel your steadiness. They trust your presence. They come to you not for performance, but for clarity. That's what leadership really is, not authority, but alignment. Marcus reminds us that there is no higher judge than the one you carry within, that the real question isn't how others see you, but whether you can look at yourself without flinching, whether your thoughts, your choices, and your values are in agreement, whether your days reflect what your conscience already knows. He knew that public praise can't clean a guilty mind, that external success means nothing if your internal life is cracked, and that no reward is worth betraying your integrity for. So he lived as if his soul were always watching, not with fear, but with reverence, as if his better self were always in the room, and he acted in a way that would earn that self's respect. That's what it means to live under the gaze of your higher self, not perfectly, but persistently, not with pride, but with care. When you learn to live before your higher self, the noise of external judgment fades. You begin to measure your life not by success or failure, but by alignment, by how honestly you respond to each moment. But even the most disciplined soul will eventually face something it cannot predict, fix, or control. That is where Marcus Aurelius met one of the hardest truths of all. Fate is not yours to design, but your response always is. He wrote again and again about accepting what happens, not with bitterness, not with defeat, but with a kind of deep agreement, a surrender not of effort, but of resistance, a willingness to say, this too belongs, this too has its place. Even if I did not choose it, even if I do not understand it, I will meet it fully. This is the Stoic meaning of amor fati, the love of fate. For Marcus, loving fate did not mean you stop acting. It meant you act without clinging to results. It meant you show up with everything you have while knowing that the outcome may be different than you hoped. That balance between effort and surrender, between duty and detachment, is where his real strength was forged. He ruled during war, illness, betrayal, and personal grief. He lost children. He was betrayed by close advisors. He led an empire that often seemed impossible to govern. But through it all, he never let misfortune twist his spirit. He reminded himself that nature owes us nothing, that life has its own rhythm, that our role is not to control the pattern, but to play our part within it. This mindset gave him peace. Not because life got easier, but because he stopped wasting energy on wishing it were different. He didn't demand perfect days. He didn't ask fate for special treatment. He simply accepted what was given and responded with clarity. He wrote that the universe is change and life is opinion. Meaning, events happen, but how you see them is what shapes your experience. You cannot stop the seasons from turning. You cannot stop death, decay, loss, or time. But you can stop yourself from adding complaint, from fueling resentment, from turning pain into personal injustice. He believed that every event, no matter how difficult, carries an invitation to grow, to reflect, to act wisely. When you say yes to that invitation, even through tears, you stop being a victim of life and start being a student of it. That doesn't erase the pain, but it gives the pain a place to land, a purpose, a shape. Marcus used metaphors to describe this kind of acceptance. He said you should be like a rock the waves crash against. It stands firm and still, or like a vine that grows around whatever it touches, turning obstacles into structure. These weren't images of surrender. They were images of resilience through cooperation with reality. This acceptance wasn't lazy. It wasn't giving up. It was giving up resistance to what could not be changed so that he had energy left to do what could still be done. That's the difference between resignation and acceptance. Resignation says, "Why try?" Acceptance says, "Let me try where it matters." He believed in preparing the mind ahead of time. He wrote in the morning to remind himself, "Something unexpected will happen today. Someone will disappoint me. A plan will fall apart. And I will not be surprised. I will not act like this is unfair. I will adjust." This premeditation wasn't pessimism, it was practice, so that when life brought the test, he was ready. He had trained his thinking. He had prepared his heart. He had removed the illusion that he was in control of anything but his own behavior. Marcus believed that fate was neither kind nor cruel. It simply moved forward. And once you stop personalizing it, you free yourself from unnecessary suffering. The rain doesn't fall to hurt you. The illness doesn't arrive to punish you. The delay isn't a betrayal. They are just events, moving according to causes too complex to grasp. He reminded himself often that he was a small part of a vast whole, that his life, his pain, his role, even his existence, was one thread in a much larger design. And that awareness didn't make him feel small. It made him feel part of something meaningful. He wrote that the universe is change, but our job remains the same: to act justly, to think clearly, to love wisely. When you focus on what's yours to do and release the rest, you gain inner freedom. Because your identity is no longer tied to what happens, it's tied to how you respond. Marcus also warned that clinging to outcomes causes suffering. When you need things to go your way, your happiness becomes fragile. But when you show up fully, while releasing the need for control, you become flexible. And flexibility is strength. The tree that bends in the wind survives the storm. This flexibility allowed him to lead without becoming hardened, to feel sorrow without drowning in it, to lose without losing himself. Because he wasn't trying to win at life. He was trying to live well, regardless of how life unfolded. He believed deeply in the importance of action, but only in right action. That means doing your part with care, with virtue, with full presence, and then letting go. not becoming numb, not checking out, but staying engaged without becoming attached. This helped him carry responsibilities without breaking. He didn't say, "It's not my fault, so I won't do anything." He said, "It may not be my fault, but it is my role." That sense of role, the fusion of duty and acceptance, was his compass. And when something was taken from him, whether a person or a plan, he didn't pretend it didn't hurt. But he also didn't pretend it was unjust. He believed that everything in life is borrowed, that nothing belongs to you, not even your own body. And when something is returned, it is not a punishment. It is the natural course of things. This made him grateful, because he didn't see joy as something he earned. He saw it as a gift he was lucky to hold, even for a moment. And when you view life this way, you don't need it to last forever to be thankful for it. He also knew that you don't have to like what happens to accept it. You simply have to stop resisting what is already here. You can still work to improve what's wrong, still speak truth, still act with strength, but your actions are cleaner when they're not fueled by denial. Acceptance is not the end of responsibility. It is the beginning of wisdom, because now your energy is directed where it matters, not wasted on anger, not drowned in self-pity, but focused, grounded, purposeful. Marcus practiced this with everything. In illness, he did what he could. In politics, he made the best decision possible. In grief, he remembered the love instead of demanding more time. He lived with both hands open, ready to give, ready to let go. He knew that some things cannot be changed, but nothing prevents you from meeting them with courage, with grace, with a steady hand and a clean heart. That is the Stoic form of love, not a feeling, but a choice to embrace what is real, fully and without resentment. This is what he meant by amor fati, not passive surrender, but active participation, not false cheer, but full alignment with reality. To love fate is not to enjoy everything, it is to make peace with everything and to bring your best self into every moment it offers. This kind of living creates a calm that cannot be stolen, because you no longer argue with life. You walk with it, you work with it, you accept the changing seasons and still plant your garden. You accept that night will fall and still light your lamp. Marcus Aurelius lived this not because he had to, but because he saw the cost of doing anything else. He saw what bitterness does to the soul. He saw what complaint does to clarity. He saw what denial does to strength, and he chose something different. He chose to act where he could, accept what he couldn't, and love the whole of it, not because it was easy, but because it was his to live. When you stop resisting life and start aligning with it, something unexpected happens. Your mind grows quieter, but your clarity grows stronger. You learn to live with what is, without becoming bitter or passive. But even this surrender to fate wasn't the final step for Marcus Aurelius. To truly stay free, to avoid falling into arrogance or stubbornness, he knew there was one more practice that mattered just as much: questioning his own thoughts. He did not trust everything that came into his mind. He examined it. He challenged it. He dissected it without mercy. And this wasn't insecurity. It was strength. Because Marcus knew that pride in your own ideas can be just as dangerous as clinging to outcomes. He wasn't afraid to admit he might be wrong. In fact, he expected it. That mindset, intellectual humility, is one of the most overlooked parts of Stoic wisdom. People often think of Stoicism as certainty, as bold declarations about how to live, but Marcus constantly reminded himself that no matter how much he learned, there was always more he didn't know. that his thinking, like his body, could become sluggish or distorted if not examined carefully. He wrote that most of what troubles us comes not from events, but from our judgments about them. And what is a judgment? A thought we've chosen to believe without proof, a mental habit we've stopped questioning. That's why Marcus stayed suspicious of his opinions, not because he lacked conviction, but because he valued truth more than ego. He trained himself to separate what was true from what merely felt true. He knew that emotions can dress up bad thinking in urgency and intensity, that we're often most confident when we're least correct. So he built the habit of pausing, of checking his own assumptions, of asking, is this thought helping me? Is it fair? Is it rooted in reason or just fear, anger or pride? He didn't assume that age made him wise. He didn't treat his role as emperor as proof of superiority. On the contrary, the more responsibility he had, the more careful he became with his conclusions. Because the more power you hold, the more damage a false belief can cause, not just to yourself, but to others. He often reminded himself that reality doesn't care about your opinion, that nature will unfold the way it must, regardless of how you feel about it, that people will do what they do, whether you approve or not, and that your job is not to bend the world to fit your thoughts, but to shape your thoughts to fit the truth. This helped him stay open. He listened to criticism without being defensive. He sought out wise counselors, not yes-men. He read widely and questioned what he read. He didn't confuse having an opinion with having understanding. He knew that certainty is comforting, but comfort isn't always honest. Marcus saw pride as a trap. He wrote that if someone proves you wrong and you change your mind, you've learned, not lost. That truth is not weakened by admitting error, it is strengthened. Because what matters is not being right all the time, but becoming less wrong over time. This form of humility also kept him from judging others too quickly. If he didn't trust his own opinions completely, how could he pretend to know the full story of someone else's life? He resisted the temptation to label people. He didn't let first impressions rule him. He reminded himself that behavior is visible, but motives are hidden. And so he gave others the same grace he gave himself, room to be complex, room to be mistaken, room to grow. That doesn't mean he ignored injustice or foolishness, but he approached it with the knowledge that everyone, including him, is working through some confusion. He also questioned his emotional reactions. If he felt offended, he asked whether the offense was real or whether he had taken it too personally. If he felt fear, he asked whether the danger was present or imagined. This habit of questioning saved him from many internal battles. Because thoughts come fast, feelings attach to them, and before we know it, we're acting on a story we never stopped to verify. Marcus worked to break that chain, to pause long enough to see clearly, to hold space between thought and reaction. He believed that wisdom begins where certainty ends, that if you think you know everything, you've already stopped learning. But if you admit your ignorance, you stay curious. You remain open to deeper understanding. This humility wasn't soft. It made him stronger, because he wasn't clinging to fragile certainty. He was building from solid awareness. He didn't need to be the smartest. He needed to be accurate. He didn't need to win debates. He needed to live in alignment with reason. He also recognized that knowledge is always partial, that no person, no matter how educated or powerful, can see the full picture. So he worked with what he knew, but gently, with flexibility. He didn't idolize his own views. He carried them like tools, not weapons. This also helped him deal with disagreement. He didn't see different opinions as threats. He saw them as chances to sharpen his thinking, to either strengthen his beliefs or revise them, because to change your mind when new truth is found is not weakness, it's maturity. He didn't talk over people to prove his point. He listened to understand what they valued, and in doing so, he sometimes discovered that what looked like disagreement was simply a different expression of a shared goal. That many arguments dissolve when you stop needing to win. This mental humility translated into personal peace, because when you're not enslaved to your opinions, you don't have to defend them at all costs. You can change, you can adapt, you can evolve. That freedom is rare and deeply powerful. It also allowed him to focus on what truly mattered: action. He wrote that philosophy should not make you clever, it should make you better. If your ideas don't lead to greater kindness, courage, and clarity, then what use are they? He didn't pursue wisdom as decoration. He pursued it as a guide for living. And a guide only works if you keep checking where you are, if you don't assume you've already arrived. Marcus kept asking himself, what have I missed? Where am I still blind? Which assumptions am I still clinging to that no longer serve me? This relentless self-questioning kept him grounded. It protected him from arrogance. It kept his growth honest, because the mind, left unchecked, becomes lazy. It starts defending itself instead of serving truth. And that's how pride grows, quietly, with each unchallenged thought. He knew that even the most dangerous beliefs often sound reasonable. That's why he didn't trust them blindly. He examined their roots, their outcomes, their alignment with nature and virtue. And only then, if they held up, did he let them guide him. He also understood that his position gave him blind spots. That power and status can make people stop challenging you, that you can start believing you are right just because others nod. He resisted that illusion. He sought feedback. He stayed teachable. This humility was not the absence of belief. It was the presence of discipline. A discipline that filtered his thoughts before they became behavior. A discipline that put clarity above pride. That put honesty above image. He didn't lower his standards. He raised his awareness. He knew that doubting your thoughts doesn't mean rejecting all of them. It means checking their foundation, their motive, their truth. And from this practice came wisdom. Not a loud, boastful wisdom, but a quiet, grounded one. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that helps others feel heard. The kind that stays calm in the face of challenge. Marcus Aurelius didn't want to be followed for his ideas. He wanted people to live better because of how he lived. And the only way to live better is to remain open, to question yourself constantly, to choose learning over certainty. That's the kind of mind that never stops growing. The more Marcus Aurelius trained himself to question his thoughts, the more he realized how easily the mind escapes. Even after pulling ego out of the equation, even after humbling himself before truth, there was still another challenge he had to face every day: staying here. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. Here. Because even the wisest thoughts mean nothing if they carry you away from the moment you're living. He learned that the mind does not stay still by default. It drifts. It spins stories. It replays what's been done or anticipates what might happen. And without careful attention, it misses the only place where life actually exists: the present. Marcus didn't just write about presence like a motivational line. He practiced returning to it. He reminded himself again and again throughout his journals that the current moment is enough, that now is the only time you are guaranteed, that every breath not grounded in this instant is a step away from peace. He would ask himself directly, why are you worrying about what hasn't happened? Why carry weight from something that's already over? Why pollute this hour with regrets or projections? These weren't rhetorical questions. They were anchors, each one a way to pull his attention back to the task in front of him. He called it doing the work of the moment. Whether it was listening, making a decision, speaking to someone, reading, leading an army, or just sitting quietly. The discipline was always the same. Focus fully on what's in your hands right now. Not what might come. Not what others are thinking. Not what you wish had gone differently. But this moment, fully lived. This sounds simple, but it was a battle, even for him, even for an emperor philosopher. Because the mind wants to wander. It wants to escape discomfort, to chase stimulation, to relive old injuries or fast forward to imagined futures. But each time it did, Marcus responded with discipline, not frustration. He didn't berate himself for drifting. He simply returned. Quietly, repeatedly. He compared it to training a body. No one expects a weak arm to lift a heavy weight without practice. Why should we expect the mind to hold steady without training? Mindfulness to Marcus was not mystical, it was muscular, and muscles are built through repetition. He believed that returning to the present wasn't a one-time achievement, it was a constant process, the work of a lifetime, because each day presents a new chance to leave the moment and a new invitation to come back. The Stoic path isn't about staying perfectly still in the now. It's about learning to notice when you've left and choosing to return. He often grounded himself in breath, in posture, in physical awareness. He observed what his body was doing, where his eyes were focused, how his hands were moving. These were cues, clues, to whether his attention had scattered, and if it had, he would pause and redirect it gently. He also used language to stay grounded. His journaling wasn't abstract, it was precise. It was filled with present-tense reminders. This is your task. This is your role. This is what's in front of you. He wasn't trying to sound wise, he was trying to stay awake. Marcus often noted that even people who fear death rarely live fully. They fear the end of time while constantly escaping the time they have. But to live truly is to be present, not in theory, but in behavior. To feel the weight of this moment, not as a burden, but as a blessing that won't come again. He didn't separate mindfulness from morality, because if you are not present, you cannot be just. You cannot speak clearly. You cannot act with care. Distraction makes you reactive. It clouds your judgment. It scatters your values. But presence makes you deliberate. You see clearly. You respond with proportion and grace. Marcus returned to the moment when he felt overwhelmed, when problems stacked up, when the empire felt like too much to hold. He reminded himself, you don't need to carry the future, just do the next right thing. This task, this word, this step. That's how you stay grounded when the world feels chaotic. He also used mortality as a focusing tool. If this were your last hour, would you waste it replaying arguments in your head? Would you spend it imagining disasters that haven't happened? Probably not. So why wait for death to remind you of the value of now? This practice shaped how he worked, how he rested, how he led others. He didn't multitask his way through life. He didn't speak to people while thinking about something else. He gave his attention like it was something sacred, because it was. He knew that attention is a form of love, a form of respect. When you give it fully, you honor what's in front of you. When you divide it, you turn life into a blur. That's why he didn't just chase efficiency. He aimed for presence. He believed that even 5 minutes lived with intention is worth more than an entire day spent distracted. He accepted that his mind would wander. He just refused to let it stay gone for long. He built cues into his day, moments to stop, breathe, remember. He didn't wait for life to slow down. He created space in his own thinking, and from that space came calm. He saw time as something to be used well, not filled mindlessly. And using time well doesn't always mean being productive. It means being present. Whether you're working, resting, speaking, or walking alone, the measure is not how much you do, but how fully you live what you're doing. Marcus also noticed how the mind clings to what's over. Regret is a form of time travel. It takes you out of your life and puts you in a story that can't be changed. But the present moment is a place of power. It's where your choices live, where your values show up, where peace can actually be found. That's why he let go of resentment quickly, not because it wasn't justified, but because it kept him stuck in a past that no longer existed. He chose to bring his mind back to this breath, this task, this person in front of him. That's where life happens. He didn't see presence as something soft. He saw it as strength. The ability to return to the moment even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, because that's where growth lives. Not in fantasy, not in avoidance, but in facing what is. He practiced gratitude as a tool to stay present. Gratitude isn't about counting blessings. It's about recognizing this moment as enough. When you're grateful, you stop reaching. You stop complaining. You stop escaping. You settle into now, and in doing so, you meet life directly. He also trained presence in how he listened. He wasn't waiting to speak. He was hearing. And that kind of listening is rare, because it requires you to set aside your agenda, to stop planning your response, to simply be there, fully engaged, without trying to control the outcome. That's mindfulness in action, not sitting still with your eyes closed, but moving through life with your mind open, being awake in your own story, not just passing time. Marcus didn't chase techniques, he chased truth. And the truth is, you can only live one moment at a time. So why live any of them halfway? He knew that the mind's default is to drift, but his standard was higher. He returned again and again, not because he was failing, but because he was practicing. And that practice, repeated daily, made his life more whole. This is not a one-time insight. It's a lifetime of choosing to return. When the mind pulls you forward, you come back. When it drags you backward, you come back. When it tries to numb you or frighten you or distract you, you come back. Back to the breath, back to the body, back to the now. Marcus Aurelius didn't preach presence. He lived the discipline of it. He returned to the moment not once, but again and again. And in doing so, he found what so many people never do. The full weight of his own life, lived as it was happening. You've just walked through the mind of a man who ruled an empire, but served something far greater: virtue. Marcus Aurelius didn't live to impress. He lived to improve. He didn't preach from a throne. He wrestled with his flaws on the page. And from that struggle, he gave us a manual, not for ancient Rome, but for this exact moment in your life. He taught us to zoom out when ego takes over, to embrace impermanence as a reason to love deeper, not hold tighter, to lead with quiet strength even when no one's clapping, to build an inner citadel that no failure, betrayal, or injustice can shake. He showed us how to use death as a wake-up call, not a fear, how to practice justice in broken systems, how to be mindful, not just when it's peaceful, but especially when it's not. He reminded us that every human is kin, that anger is a choice, that true parenting starts with personal example, that hardship is training, that pleasure can trap us more than pain, that silence can be louder than words, that gratitude is complete only when it asks for nothing back. He lived by a higher standard, not imposed by others, but carved into his conscience. He returned to the moment over and over, not because he was perfect, but because he refused to live distracted. He accepted fate, but never used it as an excuse, and above all, he questioned himself constantly, because pride is the first thing that pulls us off the path. So now it's your turn. What idea struck you the hardest? What lesson are you going to practice starting today? Leave a comment below and share the one Marcus principle you're going to live by this week. Don't just read Stoicism. Live it. Speak it through your actions. And if this journey through his philosophy moved you, if it challenged you, calmed you, or sharpened your thinking, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's more timeless wisdom ahead, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay steady, stay awake, and remember, the Stoic path doesn't start in the books, it starts in the mirror.